event. First of all, I'd like to welcome you to the Chautauqua Harbor Hotel for our second Chautauqua Lake Symposium. Strength and Unity, Our Lake, Our Future is the title of today's activity, and it's great to see so many people here. I dare say more than last year. So this will be an annual event. That is the intention. And we first of all would like to thank David Hart and the associates here at the Hart Hotel for arranging this venue and for also taking care of all of our needs for today. So if we can just give them a quick round of applause. They've done an excellent job. A small piece, Dave's investment in this area. Growing up here, the first night we moved here in 1977 was the infamous fire of Evans Skateland. And for the longest time, this property we're on right now was just nothing more than a field with an elevated wooden platform, the remnants of that old skating rink from the old Celeron Park. Dave's vision to come in here and build another one of his flagship motels has been incredible, but also he realizes the investments made in and around Chautauqua Lake. This 17-mile body of water is imperative to our economic existence, the economic engine we have here in Chautauqua County. David himself has invested in a MobiTrack that helps clean the area. 1 year, 3 years ago, we did have a bad lake problem and the ducks were walking on the water. The weeds had collected down at this end so bad that the ducks were actually able to walk on the weeds. So he's since remedied that, but with the efforts of every one of our lake organizations and stakeholders, we have made strides. That 17-mile body of water could be contentious, but we cannot be remiss in saying that each and every one of you here is passionate about that body of water. Irregardless of our political ideologies and beliefs and scientific thoughts and figures and anecdotal evidence, the bottom line is we need to work together. Constant opposition is not going to make this effective. We've made some great strides and we're going to continue to do that. We're going to be talking a little bit more today, and they do have a presentation. Unfortunately, they're unable to attend, but the Army Corps will be talking about our aquatic ecosystem restoration project, which is 10 years in the making. First of all, I would just like to go through and welcome everybody. You know, as I go through here, I see some lifelong friends, people I went to school with, graduated with, friends, parents, acquaintances, people I've met in my role as county executive. So it is just incredible to see the outpouring of support for this lake in this endeavor. So real quick, we're just going to go right down the line. A representative from Kathy Hochul's office, Miss Bonnie Lockwood. Sitting next to her is our Senator George Borrello. And next to him is our newly elected Assemblyman Andrew Molitor. To his right is our Region 9 DEC Director Julie Barrett O'Neill. With her as well is Chad Staniszewski, and Chad will be here giving some remarks as well. Next is Dr. Rob Richardson, and to his right is Mark Lucius from NC State, from the Jefferson Project. Dr. Richardson is from NC State. For those of you who are watching online, we do have this live stream. Any questions you may have, you can address them, send them to CHQ Lake at chqgov.com. That's CHQ Lake at chqgov.com. Also today, you'll see in the back, we do have some cards, different colors to help the staff direct things. Any orange card will be questions directed to our elected officials. The yellow cards will be questions directed to Dr. Rob Richardson. Green cards will be directed to the Jefferson Project and Mark Lucius. Our pink or coral cards will be directed to Julie O'Neill and the DEC, and the blue cards will be directed to the Army Corps of Engineers. Unfortunately, as we said, the Army Corps is unable to be here. They will be here via Zoom. We found out at the last minute that their travel was they were not able to be here. So nonetheless, we will take time for their presentation. At this time, I would like to turn the mic over to Bonnie Lockwood to speak on behalf of Governor Kathy Hochul.
Thank you. Hold your applause. Good morning, everybody. Delighted to be here once again. I was here last year, a year into this position. I came out of retirement to be Governor Kathy Hochul's Western New York Regional Director. 16 years before that, I had served in the district office of Congressman Brian Higgins. no stranger to this community when he served all of us in Congress. Before that, 16 years in the city of Buffalo, 4 of them on the city council. So I'm not afraid of a challenge. When I came out of retirement, because I didn't want another job, I'm not looking for somebody else's job. I'm looking to do a good job for our governor and the community that she comes from and represents as the 57th governor of the state of New York. I really want to give credit, as the governor does, to our county executive, P.J. Wendell, bringing us together to debate, to dialogue, to learn from one another, whether it's science or research, from the residents' perspective, the economic development perspective, with all our partners in government, because we know that if we do something or we don't do something, the beautiful lake that unites us, the beautiful lake that draws us, the beautiful lake that cannot be replicated anywhere else, will continue to do what it's doing underneath or impacted from our activities around it. Because Mother Nature waits for no one. Mother Nature will do what she will do. But because of debate, because of dialogue, because of legislation, because of regulations, because of state investments, federal investments, local investments as well, trying to put our arms around it, trying to understand it, trying to mitigate it, to address it, takes courage, takes your willingness, everybody here's willingness, to come together, to listen and to learn. We may never be 100% on any other issue, but I would contend in this governor that we are 100% in loving this lake. Our friends from DEC, Julie and Chad, no strangers to many of the towns and villages and individuals here in this room today, as they continue the debate and the dialogue and the interaction on implementation. The governor's partners in government, Senator Borrello, our new assembly member, Molnaire. He remembered and I remembered we met at the Tulip Parade last season when Andy Goodell got us all in his Jeep, right? The assembly member. It was Andy Goodell, along with your local legislators here and the advocates, that worked with this governor last year when she came to announce a new Brooks Memorial Hospital to release that funding. That's an investment in the community. Looking at the Mayor of Bemis Point, reminded me today of dishes. Commissioner Jackie Bray, who was on a call with several of the leaders here recently, talking about the budget and other issues. That the Village of Bemis received over $100,000 for a new fire truck. That working with the Department of State, many of your towns and villages are working on resiliency plans, on upgrading zoning codes, on upgrading parks. This is all part of the overall structure of the investment. Recently, I think it was in December, the governor announced $24 million for the continuation and investment in sewers around the lake. Incredibly important infrastructure, as the county executive knows so well. It is in those planning, it is in those state investments that lead to better decisions about where we go from here. You'll hear that from the DEC today. So the state is committed, this governor is committed, the state remains a partner, joining with all of you as stewards of the environment so we can continue to tell the stories of the past, that we work within the realities of today, and ensure our children and grandchildren enjoy the same opportunities to be around the water and in the water as we all have. The governor is committed to this area. Last year, she brought on board at her insistence a Southern Tier regional representative. He's still on the job. His name is Frank Puglisi. He's in the front row. Frank is a former town clerk from the town of Linden, a resident of Cattaraugus County. He's engaged directly with many of the municipal leaders on a variety of problems, no stranger. That's why we're back here today. That's why we stay in touch, because it comes with that robust understanding of the factors that have been deposited, that dwell and grow, at times overwhelm the enjoyment of the water. This is what brings us together today. The dialogue and the debate continues. That's what we need. That's what we want. You know it doesn't happen everywhere else. It happens here in Chautauqua County. That's a good thing. And so on behalf of Governor Kathy Hochul, no stranger to this community, no stranger to the love of water, to the love of land, to the love of all the good things in Chautauqua County and the Southern Tier, thank you for the opportunity that you've given us to listen and to learn, because she remains committed to protecting the legacy, to investing in the protection and preservation of the land and Chautauqua Lake, to share the wonders of nature's blessing with future generations. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bonnie. And as she stated, we do not have a bigger champion for this area. Aside from our Assemblyman and our Senator, Governor Hochul does invest a great deal here in Chautauqua Lake. Coming up to speak next as an opening remark is our New York State Senator, George Borrello.
Thank you, PJ, and I want to thank you again for your leadership and putting this together, and putting people in this room so we can have what are going to be tough discussions. And I want to thank Bonnie Lockwood. If you didn't think she was brave, she rode in Andy Goodell's Jeep. That makes her. If anyone's, I've done that. You've done it.
Didn't have any sides.
Exactly. That's right. Yeah. So, but I appreciate you being here. I do appreciate, look, there's no secret that the governor and I disagree vehemently on many topics, but we are united on Chautauqua Lake and preserving this. She has been a champion for this lake, and once again, in her budget, she put $245,000 direct line items for Chautauqua Lake, and I'm glad she continues to support that. In addition to that, there's other good news when it comes to the things that stress this lake, like HABs. There is a new proposal, which I think will get into the final adopted budget, for $12.5 million to be used in lakes like Chautauqua Lake to address HABs. This is the kind of funding. This is not cheap stuff, right? Trying to address something that's really, as Bonnie said, Mother Nature at work. But we have to understand the economic impact that this lake has. About $73 million in taxes overall, all kinds of taxes, sales tax, property tax, that is attributed to this lake. 11,000 jobs here. And quite frankly, this lake is not only is the center of this county, but is the center of economic growth here in Chautauqua County. We would not have this beautiful hotel were it not for Chautauqua Lake and the value that it brings and the people that it brings to our county. So I think it's very important that we recognize that. I will tell you that when we start talking about the new DEC regs, I'm on record, and myself and Assemblyman Goodell, sorry, Andrew Molitor. He is the young Andy Goodell, though. He really is.
Same first name.
That's right. Well, it started with Andy Goodell, and now Andrew Molitor has continued this, I think, necessary exemption for freshwater navigable waterways. Lakes like this should be exempt from these, I think, DEC regs that, in the end, although wetlands are something we all need in New York State, it's not something that should, I think, impede our ability to use this lake and the economic impact that it has. And I want to compliment the DEC. They continue to be in dialogue with us. They have explained when things happen. They tell us what's going on, and as I've said before, I will take them at their word that they are going to work with us to make sure that these regs don't have a negative impact on our ability for us to enjoy this lake. But really, the biggest challenge I think this lake faces, it's not nutrient flows, it's not weeds, it's not harmful algal blooms, it's the lack of cooperation often, and that's what we have to get over. Nobody wants to jump into a scrum, folks, and that's what we see here. Often, too often. We have to be united, working together with the same goals. If we can do that, we can bring more funding, we can bring more attention, and in the end, we can bring a better, healthier lake for everyone to enjoy. So the challenge we face is something we can fix. We just have to commit to the fact that not everybody's going to get what they want. That's the bottom line. I've been in business a long time, and I've always said, in a good negotiation, everybody should be equally unhappy. And that's what we have lacked to do here. Chautauqua Lake, as I've said many times, we don't want it to be a swamp, but it's not going to be a swimming pool either. That's the nature of this. And until we realize that we have conflicting priorities and hidden agendas, we're not going to get everything that we need to make sure this lake stays healthy for our children, our grandchildren, and generations to come. So with that said, I will tell you that I'm committed to continuing to help Chautauqua Lake, that I have discussions with my fellow senators from around the state that represent other inland lakes with similar challenges, and we are united, because this is what makes us so different, particularly in upstate New York, the fact that we have these beautiful lakes and waterways, these beautiful vistas. I want to protect that from a lot of things, but mostly I want to protect it for the future generations that can enjoy it and get the life that we had growing up here in Chautauqua County. So with that, I will turn it over to my great new partner, and the guy that really has hit the ground running, and that's our new Assemblyman, Andrew Molitor.
Thank you, Senator Borrello. I have been called worse things than Andy Goodell, so if I can aspire to be half of what he is, I guess I will have been successful. You know, as I look out here at all the people that have come to today's symposium, it's pretty clear to me, and I hope that it's clear to, you know, everyone across the state, that Chautauqua Lake is incredibly important to our community and to our region. You know, it's not every issue. You don't get this many people on a Saturday morning to show up on every issue. And, you know, what I would sort of encourage everyone to do, and echo what Senator Borrello has said, is, you know, we do need to communicate with each other. We need to listen to each other. We need to think about what the issues are, and then we need to do a really good job of communicating those issues to our representatives, you know, at the local, state, and federal level, because this is a worthy fight. You know, Chautauqua Lake is one of many lakes in this community and across the state that we really do need to be concerned about, and we need to really think about its future. I'd like to thank County Executive P.J. Wendell for hosting this event. Again, this takes a lot to get everyone together and to share ideas and to think about the issues. I'd like to thank the Governor's representative, Bonnie Lockwood, and Frank Puglisi for being here today as well. It shows that we have a lot of great support. I'd like to thank the DEC for being here. I know you're going to get a lot of questions, probably. And you know, I just want to share a little bit with you what's going on in the New York State Assembly right now. We're hopeful that we're going to get the state budget. It's 10 bills. We're hopeful that we'll be able to get that done soon, hopefully before April 1st. I've learned something interesting about what happens after April 1st. If we don't pass a budget, don't get paid. Yeah, that's right, we don't get paid. And I got 5 kids, so. Yeah, there's a lot of incentive. So Senator Borrello, I'm sure as you know, Senator Borrello and I are carrying a same-as bill which would exempt inland lakes, navigable waterways up to 150 acres or more from being designated as wetlands. And of course you've heard, you know, from Andy Goodell and Senator Borrello last year that you know, lakes really they never were considered wetlands, and so we think this is a common sense bill. Right now, my bill in the Assembly is A4692. Senator Borrello's is 3656. And my bill has been submitted to the Environmental Conservation Committee. And what this means is that this bill needs to first get passed by the committee, by that committee, in order for it to move forward to a vote on the Assembly floor. And so if this is a bill that you would like to get behind, and you think that there's other stakeholders across the state who would be interested in this type of bill, you need to communicate that to your representatives, and you need to get other people across the state to communicate that to their representatives, because that's the only way that it's going to get out of committee and move forward towards a vote. Senator Borrello has mentioned the state funding that's for, specifically for Chautauqua Lake. And let me just tell you this, something very interesting. That does not happen for all lakes across the state. So I again would like to echo Senator Borrello's comments and thanking the governor for keeping that in the budget, and even increasing funding for states across, or for lakes across the state, because that is not something that happens. And Chautauqua Lake, the fact that that funding remains year after year in the budget for our lake is a really great thing. Finally, I'd like to just mention that I know there's a lot of concern about the new DEC regulations. And I think I saw there was an article this morning in the Post-Journal about, I think the town of Ellery and the town of Ellicott have submitted their plans for a herbicide application in the lake. And the first thing that happened is the DEC indicated that area is a wetland. They've marked that as a wetland. So this was an area of the lake that wasn't previously considered a wetland and is now considered a wetland. And so Ellery and Ellicott are going to need to get a permit in order to do the herbicide application. And what I'm concerned about, and I think many other people are concerned about, is that there may be delays. And I don't know that to be true. I don't know if there is going to be delays, and I would hope that there isn't, and I would encourage our DEC partners to make sure there aren't delays for that. And what I'd like to do for all of you is just sort of mention, I'm going to leave my cards on the table. If there are any issues with the wetland regulations on a case-by-case basis, I don't care if it's 5 cases or 100 cases, I would encourage you to please contact my office as soon as possible, so that, and Senator Borrello's office as well, so that we can do whatever we can to help move that process along. We can't obviously ask the DEC to do anything that they're not legally required to do, but we can inquire for you. We can ask questions. We can kind of cut through that bureaucratic red tape if need be. So please, please, please contact us. I'm going to leave my cards on the table. Senator Borrello likes to tell people that I don't have enough to do. Again, I got 5 kids. But no, I'm here because of you, and I'm here for you. I work for you. So please contact me if there's any issues, and then we can maybe keep a database as well as to the case-by-case issues. So thank you very much. Appreciate your time. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Andrew. First of all, I'd like to give thanks to my staff, who's done a tremendous job setting this up. My executive assistant, James Feldman, my confidential secretary, Lauren Ryan, and my media information officer, Justin Gould, and his partner. Justin has a great opportunity with CCS TV, Children's Collaborative Solutions Television, and one of his assistants, Connor's with us today. So give them a round of applause for really behind the scenes getting this done. I would be remiss if I didn't recognize the many organizations that are here today: Chautauqua County Watershed Conservancy, Chautauqua County Soil and Water, the New York State DEC, Jefferson Project has a table, the CLA has a table, CLP, Chautauqua Lake Partnership is out, it has a table, the Chautauqua County Health Department. I hope I'm not missing anyone, but again, please take time and go out to those tables and talk to the individuals representing. There's a lot of great information out there, and we really want people to be engaged. I'd like to take this time also to recognize some of our elected officials that are here today. We do have mayors from Mayville and Bemis Point. Ricky Seiper is in the back from the village of Mayville. And up front we do have Mayor Jeff Molnar from the village of Bemis Point. Elected officials from the village of Lakewood, we have Ellen Barnes and Nancy Jones here with us today. Our town supervisors are Don Emhart from the town of Chautauqua and Larry Anderson from the town of Ellery. From the town of Busta, we have Town Councilman Jim Andrews and Doug Brown. With us today from the legislature, we have Legislator Marty Proctor, Dalton Anthony, John Penhallow, and also with us today is Chautauqua County Legislature Chairman Pierre Chagnon. With us, sitting here quietly, hiding behind the cameras, is Vince Horgan, former county executive. And it's interesting that this lake concern started with several of us. I remember getting on if Vince remembers, we were on a boat out here when the summer wind was still floating, and we said we need to do something. The Chautauqua Lake Management Alliance just completed its study, so where do we go from here? We can't let the investment in Chautauqua Lake end. So 4 of us, myself, Fred Crosscut, Vince, and Mark Tarbrake sat down and started coming up with a plan. And it was under Vince's administration where the Chautauqua Lake Management Alliance began. And with, Chautauqua Lake Watershed Management Alliance began. And it's from that we have gained momentum, traction, and had consolidated economic support for different lake endeavors. So again, I thank Vince for all of his hard work. And as George said, this isn't one man. This isn't me. This is all of us working together. I don't know if George remembers, but the legislations he's pushing through, of all things, we were in a car driving to Washington, D.C., myself, Dave McCoy, our watershed coordinator, Pierre and Mark Geis from the IDA were driving down to our lobby days with our lobbyists down in D.C. for lobbying for Chautauqua Lake, Lake Erie, and so many different great things here in Chautauqua County. But we picked up the phone and said, what do you think about this legislation of the lakes and waterways? And George and Andy picked it up and ran with it, and it's gaining traction, as you see. As a member of the board of directors for NYSAC, the New York State Association of Counties, I brought this to our board in December, and I said, we have a problem here in Chautauqua County, and it deals with the wetlands and the wetland regulations. And I no sooner got done speaking and 5 of the other representatives raised their hand. We're focused on Chautauqua Lake. Onondaga has a different problem. Sullivan County has a different problem. Westchester County. But at the end of the day, you know, a lot of it all of it does relate to the wetlands regulations. We understand the purpose. We understand the meaning for it. But we do think there's some flexibility. Most recently, I proposed, our board passed it, and then it was passed at our legislative conference in February through NYSAC, supporting a bill to ask for the pause and or reversal of the wetlands regulations. Because again, the position that's being taken from NYSAC is that there is a significant economic impact that we don't believe, or at least I know personally, I do not believe was ever figured into this. And trust me, we have a great working relationship with the DC, and this is by no means anything antagonistic with them. It's just making the point that there's a lot to this, and we're going to continue that work, and we're going to continue bipartisanly, and this is a statewide issue. This isn't just a Chautauqua County issue, although I did speak with Sean Mahar, the interim director of the DEC, and he's very familiar with Chautauqua Lake. We are probably one of the most noted lakes in all of the New York State lakes. I think there's 6,000. Is there, Joe? What's the number of lakes? I'm sorry. What's the number, Joe?
I don't have that number.
Okay.
I can get you.
It's a pretty large number. Maybe not 6,000. I heard that, but a pond might be considered a lake in some areas. But nonetheless, you know, working together is really what is going to drive this. We all know there is no silver bullet for Chautauqua Lake. What we've done now is a combination of efforts, and those things need to continue. But we're going to talk, and we're going to hear more importantly about the DEC, or from the DEC, and their investment in the Aquatic Ecosystem Restoration Project. We have put all our money in a basket, if you will. We have tried, this is probably, I'd bet science needs, the scientific needs to move forward with this program. The Jefferson Project is doing a tremendous amount of work, and without them, we would really be behind. And the Army Corps said the work with the Jefferson Project is great. The work on all the other studies is imperative to what we need in order to complete this aquatic ecosystem restoration project. But it will take that unity. It will take working together. No one person, no one group, no one method is going to get this completed. So, without further ado, just coming on in, somebody that needs no introduction around here, but also one of our champions in Washington for Chautauqua Lake. Little story, the investment in Chautauqua Lake, how far it reaches. There's an urban legend out there that the Buffalo Bills needed to switch a football game, and the governor reached out to Roger Goodell. Commissioner, we need some help. We need to move this Bills game. Well, the Goodell family still owns a home in Chautauqua Institution. And I think it was mentioned, wouldn't it be nice if Chautauqua Lake would be able to get the funding they needed with the Jefferson Project? Well, we got our funding, and the Bills moved the football game. So the influence we have is far beyond the boundaries of Chautauqua County, and we know this. Again, one of the greatest champions of our lake in Washington, without any question, is our esteemed Congressman, Mr. Nick Langworthy. So, Nick, if you would.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to be with you here today, and I think this is an incredible showing of support for our lake and our future. And I want to start off this morning by saluting our county executive, because I think he's articulated a vision which will bring a brighter future for our community and our lake. And he is, from minute one of my time in Congress, has been pounding on my door, fighting hard to bring resources to the fight as we go and tackle the challenges that this lake faces. So PJ, congratulations for all your hard work, as well as the county legislature. And Mr. Chautauqua Lake himself, Pierre Chagnon, has been someone that I have really learned a lot about Chautauqua Lake from. Chautauqua Lake has been a big part of my life. I grew up, born in Jamestown, grew up in South Dayton, but had an aunt and uncle that live in Greenhurst. And I would spend at least a couple weeks a summer spending time and enjoying everything that Lake Chautauqua is. And, this is an important moment for us as we iron out differences that might exist in opinion and bring people together across the political spectrum. This is not a Democrat or Republican issue. This is an us issue. This is our moment to get this right. Chautauqua Lake is the key to the future of Chautauqua County. It is a God-given resource that we are so blessed to have. And I have stated time and again that, as people ask me at the outset of my time in Congress, what do you want to achieve while you serve? And one of those things is making sure that Chautauqua County is in pristine condition, with Chautauqua Lake as the economic development gem and resource that we can build that brighter future on. In recent years, we've watched our lake struggle with environmental challenges, algae blooms, invasive species, sedimentation. These issues have impacted our tourism. They've hurt our local businesses. They've threatened our lake's future. And that's why I am joining with our county officials, our municipal officials, our governor. I'm really grateful to see Bonnie Lockwood from Governor Hochul's office here, locking arms with our Senator George Borrello and our brand new Assemblyman Andrew Molitor as we work together for that brighter future for Lake Chautauqua. During the fiscal year 2024 appropriations process, one of the very first things that I got to work on was to secure a $500,000 federal appropriation, working with Senator Schumer across the aisle, for the Army Corps of Engineers study that we have. We actually signed the agreement, what was that, last October. And that was a critical step in the right direction, partnering with that Jefferson project and working to get all of the data so we have the footprint. We get the blueprint as to how to fix our lake. And the one thing that surprised me greatly was when Pierre Chagnon said in all of his recollection that this was the first time we saw federal funds come in to Lake Chautauqua. And that really surprised me. I knew it had been a while, but I didn't know it had been in that long of a while. But that time has come, and the Army Corps of Engineers is conducting that study, and I know we continue to communicate with the Army Corps about this important project, and will continue to pursue the appropriations as they need to be replenished to make sure that study is finished and that blueprint is written for what we have to do for this lake, and hopefully continuing to move this timeline forward. I will continue to push for every additional dollar of federal support needed to implement these recommendations once they are determined. The funding that we've secured is just the beginning. We are laying the foundation for a larger and long-term commitment to the health of Chautauqua Lake. You know, when you look around the lake and its community, and this project here in Celeron is a gem. Bringing people and seeing a nice full parking lot, and it's not just from this symposium here today, but people that come to visit, and having this hotel and conference center right here on these shores. I mean, there are places around the country that would kill to have a lake like this. We have to make sure we are utilizing it to its absolutely full potential. And, you know, this boosts our local economy, it drives tourism, it enhances all of our qualities of life. And when the lake is healthy, the surrounding businesses thrive. Property values go up. More people want to visit, and our entire region benefits. When the lake suffers, everyone feels it. And that's why this study that the Army Corps has undertaken is more than just an environmental study. It's about the long-term future of the economic health of Chautauqua County. We know what's at stake, and we know that if we don't take decisive action on our lake, things can only get worse. And the statement of intent that we signed with the Army Corps of Engineers was that commitment. And I am committed to doing whatever it takes to turn the lake around, fighting for whatever funds and funding sources that we can, but it's going to take everybody working together. It's going to take us getting beyond, you know, differences of opinion, parochialism, because we have to realize this lake is the key to the future. As a product of this community, I understand our population loss, and it's something that guides my worldview and my decision-making in Washington, because we've all had to say goodbye to too many friends and neighbors. And there are too many people that have been faced with that decision of stay or go. And there's too many people that, as they look towards their retirement moment, that are taking their lives elsewhere. I believe that the God-given resources that this county has on the shores of Lake Erie, having Chautauqua Lake, I mean, we have that critical mass. You know, we have attractions in Jamestown. We have enough to make this people's year in and year out tourist destination, and bringing that revenue with them, bringing that positive notoriety with them about how much they enjoy their time at Chautauqua Lake each and every year. But we have to get it right, and we have to meet the moment. So I am thrilled that, you know, we have the turnout we have here today for this discussion, that all the stakeholders coming together to share their information, share their ideas, share their points of view is a very healthy step in the right direction. And I will, you know, keep it as brief as any Washington politician can, but this is going to take all of us. It's going to take all of our commitment. It's going to take funding from the local level, from the state level, from the federal level, to get it right. But failure is not an option, because our future is truly on the line here. So I am fully committed to Chautauqua Lake. I look forward to working with all the stakeholders, and that was one of the most informative things I did in my first year of my first term, was bringing the different stakeholder groups around the table. And we sat in Bemis with the county executive and with representatives of our state partners to really talk about, you know, what everybody's different role in this is. But working together, we can accomplish it. And I really want to, again, salute our county executive for having the vision to bring this together. It's been a long time coming, and we have to succeed. Thank you very much for having me. God bless you all. And it's an honor to be with you.
All right. Well, thank you, Congressman. You know, again, this is not a one-person show. I can't say enough that, you know, as a movie quoter, all of our ships have to sail in the same direction, and that's really where we are. However we get to that end, they all still have to travel in the same path. So without further ado, I'd just like to remind everybody that those of you watching online, if you're interested in submitting questions, please submit them to CHQ Lake. Excuse me, submit them, they're correct, CHQ Lake at chqgov.com. Again, chqlake at chqgov.com. We will be getting to those and asking those questions as they become available. If you're interested, our next speaker is Dr. Rob Richardson from North Carolina State University. Dr. Richardson was here last year. And if you have any questions for Dr. Richardson at the completion of his presentation, you will find the yellow cards, so please submit your question. But without further ado, Dr. Richardson.
Well, good morning. I see some of the same faces here as last year, so it's good to see repeat customers, I guess. And being a university person, I'm going to have to use PowerPoint, so I'm unable to stand up here and speak for long lengths of time without assistance. So I did want to start this time and kind of give a little bit of background on why and how NC State became involved here. I'm sure some of you have that question because there's a little bit of different distance between NC State and here. So there was a open request for proposals for a survey in 2020, and NC State put in a proposal to do the survey at that time, and we were selected. And I just want to share from my standpoint maybe why we were selected. So on an annual basis, my crew surveys more area of water body for macrophytes than any other university that I'm aware of. We do a lot of vegetation surveys each year. Some lakes, reservoirs we survey every year, some sporadically, but we do a lot of lake vegetation surveys. So I've got 5 full-time employees, a couple of graduate students at the moment, and some hourlies, and that's the pool that we use for surveying. So my crew is trained to do surveys. They know aquatic plant identification, and they know what to do when they're out on the water. And as an example, we had some of the same people up here in '24 doing the survey that came up in 2020. So it's not all new people coming up, and they know what they're doing. So I've been at NC State now for 20 years, which first means I'm starting to get old, but second means I've been around a little bit now and had some varied experiences. So I just want to point out some of the areas that we've worked in. And just for clarification, my job at NC State is research and extension. So I don't teach, I do research, and then when people have a need for whatever I can provide, guidance, information, whatever, that's where we also try to help out. So as part of that, we've had some international work with NIWA in New Zealand, State of Victoria in Australia, Ministry of Natural Resources, Ontario, Canada, and we've worked with various lake managers across the U.S., anywhere from California, Puerto Rico, New York, Idaho, Florida. So we've been fortunate to be involved in a lot of different projects. And you can see some of the images here. I don't know how well they show up from the back. But up here is at the upper right is a major steam generation plant on the East Coast that that we help provide some guidance on. And at the bottom, going from left to right, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, Puerto Rico, and then it's actually an aquatic site at the bottom right, North Carolina, that's got giant salvinia. It doesn't look like it, but there's water underneath that giant salvinia. So we don't go into these sites and tell people what to do. We go in and try to answer questions. Sometimes we ask our own questions, but try to provide some guidance and some assistance in whatever issue they're having with aquatic plants. So, that's kind of my perspective and how we got involved here. So on the research side, we do have a fairly comprehensive set of research facilities. We have greenhouses and mesocosms in Raleigh. So of course Raleigh's a fairly warm climate, but we've also established mesocosm facilities in Laurel Springs, North Carolina, which is in the mountains. It's about 3,200 feet elevation, so a lot cooler than Raleigh, typically more rain, more cloud cover, so we can do some research in different climates. And up at the upper right are some of our plant propagations, and of course our greenhouses get warm. We do have water chillers in our greenhouses to keep the water cool when we're trying to grow plants that don't like really warm water. So that's just a little bit about kind of what we do and I guess why I'm here. So moving into Chautauqua Lake, all of you of course are very familiar with Chautauqua, so there's no point in me standing up here and telling you about Chautauqua because you all know that. But obviously Chautauqua is very important. If it wasn't important, you all wouldn't be here. All of you have other things to do, I'm sure, on a Saturday, but it's important to you, and that's why you're here today. So, of course, it has a great fishery. It's also heavily used for boating and recreation. It's a major economic focal point for Western New York, and all kinds of reasons why people would use it for tourism. And it's a Class A water body. Drinking water comes out of Chautauqua also. So it's a very mixed use, well-loved water body. So there are also environmental challenges, right? I mean, that's part of the reason why everyone's here also, is that there are numerous challenges. So like a lot of other water bodies, Chautauqua now has a mix of invasive species. You have invasive plants, you also have some invasive fish and invasive mussels. And again, that's not necessarily unique to Chautauqua. There are a lot of water bodies that have problems with invasive species now. Water quality also tends to be an issue in Chautauqua, especially in summer with warm water. There are regularly harmful algal blooms, which are certainly a nuisance. And it being, of course, a well-loved water body, you also have, and it's tied into the algae, nutrient issue. So anytime that you get runoff, there's nutrients coming in. You have legacy nutrients in the system that have built up over time. And then, when you have excessive plant growth and that plants die all at once, you can also have nutrient release from those as well. So all those present challenges for Chautauqua, how it's managed, and kind of how we got here. So I am a plant person, so now we're going to move into plants, which is my area of expertise. So Eurasian water milfoil, of course, is one of your most common and most problematic species. It was first documented in the U.S. in 1902 and first documented in Chautauqua in 1972. So it's not a newcomer. It's been here quite a while. But as you know, milfoil is capable of aggressive growth and rapid spread. So that's how it's spread widely across the northern U.S. So it can reproduce from fragmentation, it produces seeds, and stolons also aid reproduction. So it has really 3 different reproductive mechanisms. It's able, of course, to form dense vegetative mats. So that's where the problem comes in, is when you get the really dense vegetative growth, and it can outcompete native species in some circumstances. It's also listed as a prohibited and regulated invasive plant in the state of New York and also in other states as well. So the next one kind of on the list is curly-leaf pondweed. So unlike a lot of the other species or plant species that we have out here, curly-leaf pondweed usually has a really unique life cycle. It's different than most of the other ones that we deal with. Curly-leaf will sprout and emerge in the fall. It'll kind of sit there over winter, and then right about this time of year is when it really wants to start its active growth. So it starts growing actively much earlier typically than our other invasive aquatic plant species. and then around June-ish time frame is when it starts to senesce. So at that time, it's dying off, it's producing turions, which is its main reproductive strategy, and then you typically won't see curly-leaf in the midsummer when a lot of other vegetation and algae is really going crazy. So that reproductive strategy is quite unique compared to most of our other aquatic plant species. It's also not a newcomer. It was first documented in the U.S. in 1859 and in Chautauqua in 1937, so it's also been here a while. So from a SAV monitoring and management standpoint, the first formal surveys of SAV, submerged aquatic vegetation in Chautauqua, was done in 1937. In 1948, the lake was described as having jungle-thick weeds that ensnarl boats and make swimming impossible. So you can see that the weed history here is quite significant. Plant harvesting began in 1962, herbicides began in 55, herbicides were paused in 93, biocontrol introductions in 2002, herbicide treatments restarted in 2016, and then in 2020 again NC State started doing a survey. So as part of our survey design, we looked at defining the littoral zone for the North Basin and the South Basin, and we used a slightly different definition or different water depth, primarily just to have a few more points in the North Basin. If we'd used the same, we would have had fewer points in the North Basin than the South Basin. So to try to even out the points, we used a 10-foot or less definition for South Basin and 12.5 feet or less in the North Basin. So again, our efforts are focused on the littoral zone where we would expect the plants to be growing. We don't want to survey 100 feet of water depth or whatever. We're not going to find plants. There's no point. So we're looking at around 4,200 acres of Chautauqua that we're actively surveying. And here you can see a grid overlay of the points that we would go to. So again, these are point intercepts, so we would go to a specific GPS coordinate and survey that point and then move on to the next. The original point locations are based on a 100 meter by 100 meter square grid design. And also for 24, we added 70 additional survey points. They're the lighter color ones there, but you can kind of envision survey points as being like pixels on a screen. So the more you have, the more resolution you have. So we added those points to get a little bit more resolution in the South Basin. Now these are similar to the SAV monitoring methods that we use in other systems that we survey, so just to give you a good primer on what we would do. We're typically coming here in late summer. It was around 1,070 points that we sampled in 24. At each point we're throwing a double-headed rake twice, recovering the rake, and then qualifying and quantifying whatever is on that rake. So any plant species that are on the rake, we're recording. We're also doing a quasi-quantitative method, giving it a rake density score, and then we're also giving it a relative abundance rating on a 1 to 100% score. So all that is the data for each individual point that we would have. While we're doing this, there's also a sonar unit on the boat that's recording sonar data. So the sonar data is used to tell us how much plant material is down there. The sonar data can't tell you what is down there, but it can tell you how much. And so if you look at the bottom right, we would generate a heat map from the sonar data. So the brighter the color, the more plant material you have down there, the cooler the color, such as dark blue, the less plant material that you would have down there. And I did get a question about this last year, but we do a lot of these surveys in North Carolina where our primary target is Monoecious hydrilla. That's the #1 problematic species that we have in North Carolina. And we do these rake tosses on somewhere around 100,000 acres annually. And there's some examples of hydrilla in different reservoir systems, rake tosses from those collections. So 2020 was when we first did the survey again. So looking back to 2020, we had about 980 points sampled, and in that pie chart you can see the distribution of plant material at each point. So in other words, how much was trace, or very little plants, and then sparse, moderate, and dense. And you can see that the dense rating was somewhere around 29%, I think. And then there'd be a little bit of the points on the map would be a heat map type point. So the brighter the color, the more dense that point would be. Now, when we move to 24, we'll see that the density has shrunk. So there's a lot fewer sites that have dense vegetation in 24 than in 2020. So we actually had more sites. 94% of our sites contain vegetation. So more sites contain vegetation, but the vegetation overall was less dense. So in general terms, from a habitat standpoint, you don't want really dense vegetation. You want that moderate or sparse vegetation, but again, it will depend exactly on what you're talking about for habitat standpoint. So in 24, again, fewer of the points were dense than in 2020. So biovolume results, this will be the sonar data and interpolated sonar data. Again, if you look on the left, which is 2020, you see brighter colors. So the brighter colors will indicate that the vegetation present there was denser than lighter colors. So we'll go from a bright red, which would be most dense, again down to blues. And on the right, you're seeing kind of yellowish and greens, which is in between. But again, we're going from mean biovolume in 2020 from 39% to mean biovolume of around 31%, I think, in 24. So this map is specific to Eurasian water milfoil distribution, and of course all of these graphics are in our report from the survey. So I know if you're especially in the back of the room, this isn't showing up well, but you can see these in the survey. So our estimated acreage for Eurasian water milfoil was around 2,300 acres of abundance, and you can see there are some areas that show up as red, which would be really dense Eurasian, and other areas that look quite a bit less sparse than those red areas. That would be your greener colors. Here's some images from our survey. Image A is dense Eurasian water milfoil biomass in Burtis Bay. B is some just healthy material recovered from Burtis Bay. C is showing stem tip damage from a biocontrol agent in the South Basin. D is flowering at the time of the survey in Burtis Bay. And E are some plant fragments of Eurasian water milfoil that have adventitious roots. So in other words, those plant fragments are sprouting roots and they'll be forming new plants. So moving into curly leaf pondweed abundance and distribution. Here's a few images on the right of curly leaf. The upper right image with a circle shows a turion being formed on that stem fragment. But again, you can see some of the points that are showing up as kind of orangey in color, but not a lot of high density sites throughout the lake. Well, keep skipping my starry stonewort abundance and distribution. So starry stonewort is the newest invasive. I think there's a slide earlier that I clicked through. So it's a macroalgae, relatively new to the lake. It has been very aggressive in some other water bodies. I guess the good news is it's not present in a whole lot of different points on the lake right now. The bad news is you can find it in the North Basin and the South Basin. So there's not a geographical isolation of starry stonewort. It's throughout the entire lake system. So there is one kind of orangey point down in the middle section. It may not show up for you all. Most of the points are in the sparse area, so they're not really dense yet, but would be a little bit concerned about the points just being so spread distance-wise throughout the lake. Here's some of the images of starry stonewort. So you can see there's some individual patches where it is quite dense. But again, right now, these are still isolated points and not huge areas within the lake. So looking at some of the 4 most common species in the survey over a 2-year interval from 2020, 22, and 24. Eurasian, of course, has been one of the most commonly found species, number 1 in 2020, number 2 in 22, and again number 1 in 24, which is not surprising, and somewhere around the same level of general abundance. Coontail was number 2 in 2020, number 1 in 22, and it did not rank in the top 4 in 24. Water stargrass was 3, 4, and 2 across those 3 surveys, and wild celery, Valsneria, 4, 3, and 4. So Eurasian water milfoil, water stargrass, wild celery continue to be the dominant 3 across the 4 years that we've been doing the survey, and again, coontail was less abundant in 24. So this shows several of the species change in occurrence over time. So we've got water stargrass, coontail, wild celery, Eurasian water milfoil, curleaf pondweed, and down at the bottom, starry stonewort, brittle naiad was next to the bottom. So in general, you see some year-to-year variation for most of these. The only real trend that kind of stands out is that coontail has declined over the last 2 to 3 years. Whether that's a long-term trend or not, will just have to remain to be seen. But in general, most of these species have gone up or down and then back up on a year-to-year basis. So this is specifically looking at Eurasian water milfoil, and again, it was greater in abundance in 24. So on the right, you see that bar pop back up again where it had dropped down in 22 and 23. And you can see some of the areas where it was more commonly found than in previous years. So again, not at the densities that it had been in previous years, but a little bit more widespread than the previous 2 surveys. So one of the things that we look to do when we're doing these surveys is how you could make the surveys either more efficient or add resolution to them in the future. I think this was mentioned last year, but maybe something that we want to look at in the future. Is there a way to include drones or unmanned aerial systems to increase data collection, either make it more efficient or look at areas more over time? So in general, the more data you have, the better you'll be able to interpolate that data and make predictions about either the past or the future. And UAVs represent a very efficient way to collect a lot of data. Now, there are limits on what you can see. You're limited to in penetration and water depth, but you can certainly see a lot at the surface pretty quickly. So moving to the survey conclusions, this is not Chautauqua, but I did just want to point out that this is an unmanaged reservoir that we survey periodically, somewhere around every 2 years, every 3 years. And these are the plant communities. The legend should be about the same on each, although the species and the communities change about each time that we do the survey. So it's an interesting system to survey just because of the change in it. So the color should be the same, but when you go from one image to the next image, whether it's 2 or 4 years later, you see a lot of differences in the color, right? So I'm not going to dive into the data on this, but just making the point that plant communities do change over time, even in unmanaged systems. So now, specific to Chautauqua, the macrophyte community here continues to be dominated by Eurasian water milfoil in the fall and likely curleaf pondweed in the spring. We don't typically survey in the spring, but based on the life cycle of curleaf, that's when it would want to be growing aggressively. Survey timing, of course, is critical for determining what you have out there. It's all dependent on the life cycle of the plant. So when we're out there in August or whatever, if the plant's not there because of its life cycle, we're not going to find it. So you may have other plant species out there than what we see when we're out on the lake. Water quality challenge is observed at all survey points when we were surveying. So there is planktonic algae, filamentous algae, some benthic colonial algal growth throughout the lake. And of course, starry stonewort is still present, and it is slightly increasing over time in Chautauqua Lake. Also, despite many years of aquatic plant management related activities, the SAV community of Chautauqua Lake remains well established, so you still have a lot of different plant species out there and still spread well across the lake. In general, the North Basin does support more diversity of the submersed aquatic plant community than the South Basin does, especially during the summer. The South Basin gets more algae dominated than the North Basin, so you do see distinctions between the two basins. I was also asked to mention some pending research that NC State is doing. We do have one related trial that was just funded by the Midwest Aquatic Plant Management Society for a graduate student that I have starting in May. And she's going to be looking specifically at, I'll try to explain it in terms not on the title, but she's going to be looking at a specific harvesting timing in June where a harvester would be targeting Eurasian water milfoil, but what would be the impact on curlyleaf with that June timing. So I have seen in another system, not Chautauqua, but another system where they're running harvesters in June, they're chopping up a lot of curlyleaf pondweed, and all those curlyleaf pondweed fragments seem to want to form turions. So again, this question is about a specific timing and possible impact on curlyleaf with that timing. So it wouldn't apply to any other timings, but it's this interesting research question to me about that specific timing. If I wanted to translate that to Monoecious hydrilla, for example, a plant with a different life cycle, that would be looking at a harvesting timing of November, December for hydrilla. So it's all about the plant biology and the specific timing. The other aspect of that is nutrient release from curlyleaf when it wants to senesce. So what is the potential nutrient release when those plants want to senesce in June? And just see how much is there or what is the potential to come off of those plants. So two separate questions with that, and there's the possibility that she might be doing a little bit more research that's related to Chautauqua, but again, she won't start till May, so the rest of that is pending at the moment. So those should be all of my prepared slides, and I think we'll do the questions later.
Thank you, Dr. Richardson. So, as we've seen, there is an immense amount of research going on in the lake. Uniquely, I do say jokingly with people, and it is a known scientific method, but with all of the science, all of the technology, deep water sonar, side sonar, all ways to measure aquatic vegetation, the most common way is we tie a rope on a rake and we throw it in and we see what comes out. So again, sometimes the simplest methods brings us the most results. But thank you, Dr. Richardson. And you know, the interesting piece is as we move forward with all of our speakers today, what we have formed over time are relationships. So it's not just a matter of we're going to come in, I'm going to do a study, or we'll do a study, we'll get, you know, our support financially, and then we're moving on. But Dr. Richardson has been in contact with myself, with other different lake stakeholders, and always willing to talk, discuss, and we really do appreciate him coming here today. Again, if you have any questions, CHQ Lake at chqgov.com for those of you watching online, and for us here in person, it would be the yellow card. You know, we're a little ahead of schedule, and that's not always a bad thing. If it was a beautiful sunny day, I know you'd be chomping at the bit, but it's a little dark, overcast, and cool. But we do still want to move the program along. So at this time, a little early, but we're going to ask Mark Lucius, a senior research specialist with the Jefferson Project, to come up and present. The Jefferson Project has been an ongoing endeavor, and if you haven't yet, please go back out into the lobby and check the Jefferson Project at Chautauqua Lake, the banner that they have, beautiful new banner, and it's exciting to see that we are now established with the Jefferson Project. Some question over time, you know, different opinions and variations, but the science is the science. We cannot refute that. Personal opinions, desires, etc. But what we're looking at is the focal point of the science here, and the main focus of the Jefferson Project are our harmful algal blooms. Many of you sitting around here have lived on this lake all of your life, and we remembered 3 years ago we didn't have the ice cover. Oh, the weeds are going to be horrible. Well, to our belief, they weren't as bad. So, and last year we didn't have much of an ice cover, and we were right in the middle. So we have a lot of theories, anecdotal, but the best part about this is science is what's driving us. So without further ado, Mark, if you come on up and explain, give us some information on the Jefferson.
Good morning. Thanks to our hosts for inviting me to speak today. And I want to start off by apologizing because I'm actually filling in for Dr. Allison Reisick. She's on maternity leave, so congratulations to her. But unfortunately for you guys, you're stuck with me instead. She was here last year. Some of you may know her. She's a great spokesperson for the project. She's local, so we love her. But again, I'll be speaking to you today about the Jefferson Project. My name is Mark Lucius. I'm a senior software engineer with the project, but I also have a master's degree in environmental science with a focus on limnology. So I'm going to be giving you sort of a broad overview, broad strokes of what the project is, what we're focusing on, and some of our goals for 2025, along with some active research that we're doing. So just to give you some background on the project, it was over 10 years ago that we formed this collaboration between IBM, RPI, and the LGA, which is a lake association over on Lake George in the Adirondacks, with the goal of really fusing science and technology and advocacy to form this new model for lake protection. And so now, after 10 years of doing some great work on Lake George, we've potentially, there we go, moved to Chautauqua Lake here with new local partners, new funding sources. We're taking that same model and that same strategy from Lake George here to Chautauqua Lake. And this isn't new, right? You guys have seen us for a few years now. It's been since 2020 that we started our pilot research. These have been sort of short seasons of short deployments of some of our sensor platforms. So you might have seen them out on the lake, the vertical profilers. We'll talk more about those in a few minutes. But 2025 really marks the start of significant funding from New York State for the Jefferson Project. So this is where we're really going to start ramping things up and really fulfill that full model that we did at Lake George here at Chautauqua Lake. So like I said, we've had partial seasons for the most part, starting sometime in July, August sometimes, depending on the year. But this year we're going to be going out in 8 days, actually, to start putting out the profilers, starting surveys. You can look out the window, there's no ice. We're ready to roll, right? So we're going to get our platforms out there very soon, and we're going to get this full season for the first time of open water data collection with our platforms. In 2024, with some funding and some help from our partners at the Chautauqua Institution and the Sheldon Foundation, some tributary stations were installed along 6 critical tribs entering Chautauqua Lake with some cool instrumentation that we'll talk about later. And then we're going to be enhancing those and adding some functionality in 2025 as well. We're also going to be building weather stations, so these will be designated weather monitoring stations, separate from the tributary stations, separate from the vertical profilers at 2 locations around the lake. Those are still TBD, but those will be built in 2025 as well. Oops. And then finally, attending things like this allows us to expand our collaboration, right, and expand partnerships. This is not, like a lot of our elected officials said, a one-person thing, right? Everybody needs to work together to do this, and we're really excited to start working with people to make things happen here, with this end goal of developing a really significant understanding of lake processes and things that drive harmful algal blooms. That's really been our focus on Lake George, and it's our focus here, is those toxin-producing harmful algal blooms, not only understanding them, but also potentially being able to predict them. So most of you know the challenges of Chautauqua Lake, right? I don't need to tell you those. The harmful algal blooms, the invasive macrophytes, it's a drinking water source, it's a very popular recreational site. So these all combine together to make it very difficult to manage Chautauqua Lake. But with that in mind, we have some priorities and goals here aimed at solving some of these challenges. Specifically, establishing a high-resolution nutrient budget. So not just a single pie chart that might have 20% from this source, 25% from this source for nutrient loading, but a resolved time series of nutrient loading from different sources, from different locations in the watershed, all with the goal of identifying areas or hotspots in the watershed for nutrient loading into Chautauqua Lake. And then I already mentioned some of the other goals like the tributary stations, the weather stations, but also spinning up our high-resolution models. That requires these high-performance computing clusters, which take a lot of power and money to run, unfortunately, but they do some great things that you'll see a little bit later. And then beginning to think about developing that HABS forecast once we've collected enough data to start understanding the proximate drivers for the algal blooms. So our approach to doing all this is pretty intensive. So we're going to start, like I said, just in 8 days or so, doing high-intensity surveys every 2 weeks This is collecting water quality samples, here we go, throughout the lake at 15 different sites. And this is also collecting data, depth resolved as well, from the surface to the bottom and everything in between. And these surveys are really critical because they can tell us things that our high frequency sensor platforms cannot. So things like nutrient concentrations, algae. So we're going to talk a little bit later about some of the cool things we're doing with the genomics of the algal community in the lake, and also monitoring for toxins that they produce. And these data really complement our high frequency sensor data because some of them, like I said, you're understanding things that you can't understand so well with the sensors, and putting everything together kind of creates a whole picture for you. And I kind of went very quickly over the lake surveys because I think people have presented on that before. We've been doing them for a few years. But stream monitoring and stream surveys will start in 2025 for the first time. They will be conducted at the same locations that our tributary monitoring stations will go out, with potential for more locations in the coming years. And we'll be collecting data monthly for base flow, so that indicates the time in a stream when water is mostly coming from the groundwater, actually. It's not running off the surface, it's coming through the soil and then percolating into the streams. And that kind of gives you a long-term time series or trend of the water chemistry of a stream over time. But then we're also interested in storm events, right? Because these high energy events are when a lot of the action happens. And by action, I mean nutrient loading, right? Sediment loading. All these things happen in big storms. And so we have these automatic samplers that we can trigger remotely to collect samples during these storms. So those all get analyzed in the lab as well. And then develop rating curves and doing stream gauging to know how much water is entering the lake, right? Because it's not just about the quality of the water, it's also about the quantity of water, right? Because you can't develop a nutrient budget without both. And this all gets paired with our tributary stations collecting high frequency data, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a moment. And so again, these two things really complement each other very well. And then finally, this will help validate our modeling data. So I'm going to talk more about the high resolution models, but just note that the data collected from these tributaries is also critical in that aspect. So moving on now to our sensor network. So you might have heard about Lake George being the smartest lake in the world because of our smart sensor network. Well, we're bringing that same technology here to Chautauqua Lake. So we bring this Internet of Things approach, just like a lot of you might have bought an appliance recently that has a computer in it that can tell you what your grocery list needs to be, and it talks to your microwave. I don't know why you need that, but that's a thing, right? It's the same sort of thing here. All of our sensor platforms can talk to each other. They all talk to a central database. They're all streaming data in real time, allowing us to do real-time analysis and monitor things going on within the lake. And so you'll see some of the locations here. I mentioned there's 2 weather stations that are TBD. You can also see, it's a little hard to see on the screen there, so I apologize, but some of our locations for our vertical profilers are in red. Those will be on the south end of the North Basin and on the north end of the South Basin, if that makes sense. So these Internet of Things technologies, it's basically a little computer in every platform, and we have 3 types of platforms that you'll see around the lake. The first is our vertical profilers. Some of you may have seen them already on the lake in past years. These are custom built and really geared towards high frequency data collection. And by high frequency, I mean collecting samples as quickly as 4 times a second. So very, very rapid data collection, and you can't really do this with off-the-shelf platforms from environmental companies, right? So we've custom built these at RPI to achieve that goal. And the whole purpose is to measure water quality from the surface to the bottom consistently, all season long, just sending sensors up and down with a little winch, and all that data is captured and streamed back to our database. But not only does it do that, it also has acoustic sensors that look at water velocities. So these are down looking, and they'll actually be able to tell us in discrete bins how the water is moving beneath the platform at any given time. There's also an onboard weather station, which some of the best weather data we collect is right there on the lake. And so especially for things like our modeling and research into HABs, wind plays a major factor, right? So we want that on the water wind measurement. So some of our land-based stations will fill in, but really the on-the-water measurement is the best thing we can get. And then finally, these platforms also have surface fluorescence sensors. So a lot of you know when you get a harmful algal bloom, the communities will float up to the surface. And a lot of times that goes out of view of our profiling sensor. And so we have dedicated sensors at the surface focused on measuring surface fluorescence. Moving on to our tributary stations, these are also custom built and geared towards the high frequency data collection. And also, like I said earlier, focused on water quality and water quantity. So that'll be using some of our sensors plus some of the manual discharge measurements to determine the quantity, and then having the water quality sensors in the water year-round to potentially capture the quality of the water at the same time, including in the winter with our flow cell system. So this is where we can actually pump water up out of the stream into the station and have a little flow cells that's called to bathe our sensors in that stream water consistently before pumping it back into the stream. And then finally, those weather stations that will be built in 2025. And these really are to fill the gap for the weather data when we don't have the vertical profilers out there, and are also critical to validating our weather modeling. And so all of this data from the sensor network streamed to a central database, which allows us to use our analytics platform, like I said, to see things in real time, monitor things in real time, query any of the data that we want in real time. But we also have a public-facing dashboard, which I have a URL there for you if you'd like to visit it. You can see some of our sensors, the real-time data that's coming from the platforms. There's also going to be soon some links for you to visit some of our data sets that we're going to publish so that you can download and look at them yourself. Just fair warning, ultra-high frequency data, very large files. Just be prepared. So moving on to modeling now. So we talked about the surveys, we talked about the high frequency sensors, but one of the key components of the Jefferson project are high resolution coupled models. And those really bring everything together throughout the watershed and the ecosystem, starting with the weather. So modeling the weather, where it's raining, where it's going to rain, what is the wind doing, where is it windy in one location and calm in another location. These models will help us understand the weather, which drives what we really care about, things going into the lake and things happening in the lake, such as runoff of the watershed, water moving through the groundwater into the lake. These things are also modeled as part of our coupled models, which get driven by the weather models. And then subsequent to that is the hydrodynamics of the lake. So the wind can drive hydrodynamics, the water flowing in from the streams can drive that. So all that needs to work together to build this array of coupled models to really create a complete picture of lake processes and lake health. So starting first with the weather models, we'll be running IBM's Deep Thunder weather model at 1 kilometer resolution. So this is, imagine 1 kilometer grids all over the watershed of Chautauqua Lake, and each grid will have its own weather forecast. And like I said, this is critical for driving these other models. This is some of the state-of-the-art technology for weather modeling that exists, and that'll be here on Chautauqua Lake's watershed to help drive some of these other things that we actually care about. Oops. Such as nutrient loading, right? So one of our other models is our watershed model, the soil water assessment tool. We're on at a sub-daily time step. Will help us simulate what happens after we get, let's say, a large precipitation event. How does the water move through the landscape? How does it bring nutrients with it based on things like the soil type, the land use? And this all gets validated with a lot of our high-frequency sensors and our survey data, right? So one of the interesting things will actually be when those things disagree. If this model suggests that one stream should be contributing X amount of nutrients to the lake, but our surveys indicate it's much higher than that, that's when we can start to dig deeper and find out hotspots and areas in the watershed that are causing issues. And then finally, following up here with some hydrodynamic models, these images on the right are not from Chautauqua. There's from Lake George on the top and Skinny Atlas Lake, bottom right there. The top one is a transect in the South Basin, simulating water movement. You can see the different colors there indicating velocities going either north or south, depending on the color. And this is sort of the level of detail that we can get from our 3D hydrodynamics models. The bottom one there, that's Skinny Atlas Lake, and it may be hard to see at a distance, but there is a kind of a purplish blue line kind of halfway through the water column there. That's the thermocline. So you guys are well aware that in dimictic lakes like Chautauqua's North Basin, you get a thermocline with warmer water on top, colder water on the bottom. But that layer in between can convey energy. Much like you can get a wave on the surface of the water, you can get a wave on the thermocline. And some of our work in Skinny Atlas actually was able to show that these high energy waves on the thermocline can kick up sediment, aconites for cyanobacteria, and even pump pore water out of the ground, bringing up nutrients and causing harmful algal blooms. So all of these models, really one of our big goals, like I mentioned, is to develop a nutrient budget. And this needs to be a resolved nutrient budget over space and time. And we're going to focus on phosphorus, but really we're not going to ignore nitrogen either, because there has been times in Chautauqua Lake where nitrogen is the limiting nutrient. But really phosphorus is a key problem coming off the watershed and internally in the lake, right? But before we can really understand the nutrient budget or the phosphorus budget, we need to understand the hydraulic budget or the water budget. So that's very critical. And one thing that's often missing from those is groundwater. So we're going to be partnering with a professor from Duquesne University who's going to be installing some groundwater wells to start monitoring and understanding how groundwater is moving into Chautauqua Lake. Understanding the external loads of nutrients are also critical, and we're going to be doing that with some of the modeling that we talked about, the surveys that we talked about. But one thing that is underappreciated, is often viewed as a black box, is the internal processes that go on within the lake. So this is a diagram from Charlie Driscoll, Skinny Atlas Lake. There's just a ton of things that can convey and move nutrients throughout a lake that can be brought into the water column to cause harmful algal blooms, can be sequestered into the sediment, and everything in between. And there's just tons of different processes that we're going to start to do research on to better understand that black box that right now everything is kind of just unknown, and we have to sort of take the difference when we start to do nutrient modeling. We're going to open up that black box and start to look more deeply at these processes. And then finally, how do macrophytes affect the nutrient budget? Specifically, how much nitrogen and phosphorus are removed during harvesting. And then in our hydrodynamics models, one thing we're interested in is high energy events and how those interact with sediments, the pore water beneath the sediments. And so if you take away the macrophytes, how does the shear stress on the bottom of the lake change? How has sediment resuspension changed? And these are things we can start to look at with some of our 3D models. Where we can simulate, do a simulation with macrophytes and without to see the difference, sort of thing. So moving on now to active areas of research. And full disclosure, these are not my research topics for the most part, and any one of these team members could come and do an hour-long presentation on any one of these topics, but I'm just going to give you a little snippet of some active areas of research going on right now, using some of our pilot data that we've done over the past few years. The first is interbasin exchange. So some of the preliminary model outputs were showing, especially right there at Long Point between Bemis Bay and the Northern Basin, that there was a two-layer flow at the surface versus at the bottom. Between that exchange point, water at the surface would move one way and at the bottom would move the other way. And we were curious if this was real or an artifact of the model. So just last year we used some of our acoustic data. That's the sensor that's on the vertical profiler. And you notice it's the one that's going to be at the same location this year at Big Bar. And apologies, let me explain this plot just a little bit. You'll see quite a few heat maps in this coming section. So the bottom plot there is what we call a heat map. And the y-axis, so along the left side, that is the depth. So closer to the top, you're at the surface of the water. Closer to the bottom, you're at the bottom. And then along the x-axis is time. So moving left to right, you're advancing in time. And then the color in the plot indicates the velocity of the water. More red means more northward moving, more blue is more southward moving. And so he was able to identify patterns that matched the models, basically. So you can see these bidirectional flow patterns showing up in the ADCP data, just like the model suggested that they would. So this is ongoing research. There's a lot more to it that would be better explained by the guy that's actually doing it. But just know that not only are we looking at interbasin exchange, we're also looking to see how surface algal blooms may be able to move from the south to the north, and how things aggregate in different places in the lake, depending on the wind and other drivers. Moving on to the South Basin now, and I just lied to you a few minutes ago when I said this is not my research. This one actually is my research. And this is something we noticed in one of the first deployments we did in the South Basin. And this is more heat maps. So same concept here, but instead of water velocity data, the top plot is temperature data, and the bottom plot is dissolved oxygen. So in the South Basin, we're only talking about 4 to 5 meters deep, right? And typically that's not deep enough for stratification to occur. Usually in the North Basin, the thermocline sets up at about 8 meters and then gets deeper throughout the year. But here in the South Basin, we started to see periods where the temperature near the bottom would be lower than at the surface, and then subsequently you would get depleted dissolved oxygen at the bottom. So that's the brown area that you see right there. And this is critical, right? Because in the North Basin, when you get low dissolved oxygen, you get release of phosphorus from the sediment. Chemically mediated internal loading, as it's called. So we asked ourselves, can we measure this? Like, is this real? Is it going to actually produce any phosphorus? And so we did this pilot project where we had some sensors that were lent to us from one of the lake organizations, that we came up with this whole deployment of how do we get a sensor down there without disturbing the sediment. And this is what we came up with. And some of you may have seen it out there before. This was the buoy that was kind of sitting off to the side of one of the platforms. And we did just that. We were able to collect high-frequency phosphorus data from this buoy. And this is another heat map with some of the phosphorus data below it. This one's a little bit different color, so I apologize. But basically, on the heat map, you can see that little dark area right here. And if we zoom in on that, that's another brief period of stratification where the dissolved oxygen was rapidly declining. And then in the plot below, seeing these brief periods of anoxia that are still loading lots of phosphorus into the water column, which are helping fuel harmful algal blooms. But then some of our other data is now we've conductivity data to look at internal loading in the lake, and that's something we're still actively studying. Hyperspectral monitoring, this is a project that one of my colleagues is taking on with a collaboration from a university down in Texas. And this is using what's called a SORAD sensor. This is a hyperspectral camera looking at surface reflectance on the water. And this was on the South Basin VP last year. It's kind of that big apparatus right at the bow of the platform. And what it's doing is it's capturing hyperspectral images of surface fluorescence. Reflectance, not fluorescence. And what that ends up looking like is this. And it's kind of hard to decipher what it means, but think of it as taking an image. But typically when you have an image, you have maybe a red, a blue, and a green value for every pixel. But in this case, you have the entire spectrum of possible colors, including non-visible colors, at your disposal. And so you're able to see peaks in these different frequencies that correlate to different things in the water, whether it be cyanobacteria, or green algae, or diatoms, or even dissolved carbon, all sorts of things. So this is really ripe for a lot of the newer technologies such as AI and machine learning to take these really complicated data sets and start to pull out information from them that we may not be able to see ourselves. So this is a cool active area of research as well. I mentioned earlier the genomics work that we're doing. So this involves collecting raw water samples out on the lake during the surveys, but then processing them using this technique called 16S rRNA, and then essentially understanding by looking at the genetic markers what cyanobacteria, or really all microbes that are present in the water, but then looking at their genetics to understand, are they carrying the gene that can allow them to express toxins? Is that gene activated so that toxins are actually being produced? But then once we start to look at those genes, we can also start to correlate them to things in the water, right? So all of our other sensor data and our survey data can then be used to correlate why these different species are present at different times and why their genes are activated at different times. And then also starting to look at spatial differences. So not just species-wide, but how does the north genetic makeup differ from Bemis Bay in the South Basin as well? And then temporally, same sort of thing. And then finally, we talked a lot about cool sensors and models and active research, but sometimes the simplest thing is the best thing to answer certain questions. And Dr. Reisick, who I mentioned earlier, did an algal tile survey, and a lot of you may have participated. If you have a dock on Chautauqua Lake, she may have knocked on your door and said, hey, can I put a tile on your dock? And all it was really doing was capturing benthic algae growth. And by benthic, I mean algae that typically grows on the bottom. And what she was curious in finding out is, how do the pelagic or open water algae affect the benthic algae? And to answer this question, she simply looked at the growth on the tiles versus the amount of chlorophyll that was in the water from the pelagic algae. And so as you can see here in these plots, on the left-hand side, the benthic algae over time went down throughout the year, whereas the open water chlorophyll went up, essentially shading out the benthic algae groups. And that has implications for a lot of the food web modeling and internal dynamics that I talked about earlier that'll hopefully shape and help inform some of our modeling. So with that, I just wanted to reiterate that the Jefferson Project is really focused on Chautauqua Lake, but also identifying areas that we can improve the lake, right? This isn't just research for the novelty of research. Our goal is to identify areas of strong nutrient loading into Chautauqua Lake by the end of this project that can help guide management and guide action. And with that, I want to thank a lot of our collaborators, funders, and I guess we're doing questions later. Yep. We'll do questions later. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. And Jefferson has really been a tremendous partner. I know, starting with Chautauqua Institution and supported by the county and the legislature itself. So again, by no means dismissing either science, but we have a very simplistic method of data research, and as you see right now, just a little bit more scientific. I do want to inform everyone, if you happen to travel around Chautauqua Lake, there is a collaboration between Timber Huts, Small Homes, a good friend of mine, longtime friend, who just happened to get into this business, but he has worked with Jefferson Project in creating stream monitoring stations. Those are not giant outhouses with silver tubes going into the water. There are no human beings inside of that. That is an amazing amount of technology, hundreds of thousands of dollars of sensors and highly scientific meters and so forth. So somebody said, doesn't make any sense, you put an outhouse with a tube. No, it's not an outhouse, it is scientific sensors. There are 3 or 4 of them around the lake, and they are giving us a great deal of data, especially on behalf of the Jefferson Project. I would like to take a minute right now. If you have a question, or if you have any questions you've written on the card, remember the orange cards were for our elected officials. The yellow cards were for questions for Dr. Rob Richardson and NC State, and green cards from Mark Lucius and the Jefferson Project. So if you do have a card with a question, please raise your hand. My staff will be coming around collecting those cards. Again, we will be doing a Q&A at the end. So again, just submit your questions and we will take care of that. We are a little ahead of schedule, and that's never a bad thing, especially when you're dealing with presentations or governmental entities. We don't like to be long-winded. So next up, although this one might take a little while, we do have representatives from the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. I can tell you this, there's 2 things. First of all, our relationship with the DEC has been incredible. We have always had an open door. I know when I first took office, in January, I think it was February of 2020, we took a trip to the DEC offices in Buffalo. Members, different stakeholders met with us. We had a great conversation with the DEC as it pertained to some of the applications for herbicides. Since then, there was a change in leadership, and we were introduced to Julie Barrett O'Neill, and Julie has been nothing short of amazing when it comes to working with the county and our relationship. The best part, she does own a home right here in Chautauqua County, so very concerned as to what's happening. But the DEC is much more than water. As she can tell you, it's wildlife, it's fisheries, it's runoff, it's you name it. Anything to do with our environment is the DEC. So, we do spend a lot of time bending your ear on Chautauqua Lake and Lake Erie for that matter, but nonetheless, the DEC is a very broad and expansive group. So without further ado, this may be a 2-pronged approach. I know with her this afternoon is Chad Staniszewski from the DEC as well. But at this time, we'll turn the mic over to Julie and have our information. Sorry, Chad Staniszewski will take the mic first.
I got to be honest, I was hoping we were going to be a little closer to lunch and you guys would have prioritized going out to eat rather than listening to me, but I don't think I'm going to get quite that lucky today. So I am Chad Staniszewski. I'm the Assistant Regional Director for the DEC. I've been with the DEC for about 27 years, so I think I was 25 when I started as a new engineer. So I've been with the DEC for quite a long time. We also do flood control, we do remediation, we do materials management. I kind of help to oversee all of those programs at this point, but mostly my time is spent on the most controversial of those issues. So we're going to talk about a number of things today. We're going to talk a little bit, I'll give you an update on the drinking water source contamination in Mayville. We will talk about the herbicide permits this year and where those stand. We will talk about the wetland law, unfortunately. We will talk about the nutrient management and some studies that we're doing that should go along with what Jefferson Project is doing as well. And then just a quick update on the fisheries, which is a very positive note. So we came up with these. We deal with a lot more than just this on Chautauqua Lake, but we only had limited time, so we came up with the top 5 things that we're dealing with day to day. And we're going to split up this discussion. And I thought it was kind of funny because when we were determining who was going to actually say or talk about what, Julie or myself, Julie said, what topics do you want to take? I said, well, I'll take Mayville. I will take the 2025 herbicide permits. Julie's like, I'll do the nutrient management study and I'll do the fisheries update. And then it was silence. And after about 30 seconds, Julie's like, listen, one of us are going to have to talk about the wetland law. I said, I'm not going down there to talk about the wetland law. She's like, I don't want to do that either. She does this very infrequently, but she's like, listen, I'm your boss. You got to go down there. I said, no, you make more money than me. You have to go down there and talk about the nutrient law. She said, well, we'll solve this scientifically. She said, we'll flip a coin to see who's going to do it. And I know half of you are probably like, isn't that how DEC makes all their decisions? No, not true. So we flipped the coin and I lost. So I will be talking about wetlands today. So Mayville, we'll go through this topic. I know I touched on this a little bit last year. For those of you who are not aware, in 2020, there was a do not drink order issued for Mayville because the source of their drinking water, which comes from groundwater and groundwater wells, was found to be contaminated with PFAS, an emerging contaminant. At the time, New York State DOH was going across New York State to sample wells for these emerging contaminants, which have become quite a big issue for us. And Mayville was one of few drinking water supplies that were found to be contaminated with PFAS. So New York State DOH or the county DOH issued a do not drink order, which obviously kicked off a whole heck of a lot of events that DEC, DOH, the county, everybody was involved with. We believe that the majority of that PFAS contamination came from firefighting foam. So PFAS is a group of contaminants that is quite ubiquitous in the environment now. It was used in firefighting foam. It was used to coat paper plates as a water retardant. It was used in agricultural products, is my understanding. Dental floss, plumbing tape, things like that. It was quite ubiquitous. The problem with it, it doesn't really break down, and it's not good for you at extremely low concentrations, part per billion concentrations. So this actually is a picture of where we believe that potentially one of the sources came from. This is behind the Town of Chautauqua Municipal Building, and these were fire training exercises that we're doing. Now, at the time, nobody was like, hey, we're spreading this stuff all over the place. We didn't really know, right? They were doing training exercises, and we believe that's what led to it, led to the drinking water contamination. Yep. Let's go back one if I can. Okay, let's go forward 2. There we go. So we have, in 2017, as part of the drinking water infrastructure law, there was a pot of money allocated to deal with exactly this, to investigate source area contamination. We have $2 million that we have here to investigate the contamination of the source area. Now, just to kind of put everybody's mind at ease, at the time in 2020, there was a carbon system, treatment system that was put on one of the drinking water wells. My understanding, I don't really deal with this, but my understanding is that is effective, continues to be effective, and it's mitigating any impacts from source water contamination. But we do ideally would like to mitigate the source water contamination. So this summer, over the course of the next 4 months or so, we are going to be doing quite an extensive investigation to figure out where that, hopefully figure out where that's coming from. And kind of what are the migration pathways where it's getting from the source to the wells itself. So just to give you an idea of the scope of our investigation, we'll be doing about 34 soil borings. We will be collecting 250 soil samples, installing 35 monitoring wells around Mayville. We'll be doing groundwater sampling. We'll be sampling sediment and water from various ditches, and then we will be, we will be compiling all of that data, ultimately coming up, hopefully, with a conceptual plan for mitigating those impacts. At that point, we will go out to the public, and you will have an opportunity to comment on that. But right now, we're just doing the investigation. And like I said, we have $2 million to do that investigation. We'll probably use quite a bit of that $2 million. It sounds like a lot, but this work isn't cheap. So that's where we are. This real quick, we're going to focus on the Town of Chautauqua Municipal Building. We believe that is the likely source. Patterson Street and Morris Street, there's some questions for one of those that there was some firefighting foam used there. The other one is another water supply well, and we want to know a little bit more about the geology over there. So this, I just put this just really for the figure. You can see that's the Town of Chautauqua DPW building, I believe. And those black dots are, and the green dots are kind of the gridded soil samples that we'll be collecting in that source area. One of the things we want to evaluate is it reasonable to actually dig that up, or is it going to be too costly? So this is the field behind the Town of Chautauqua DPW building. And we know that there's PFAS contamination coming out of that drain. There is a drain tile field there behind the building so that it can keep that field relatively dry. So there's a series of pipes that ultimately drain to that pipe on the upper right-hand corner that discharges to a ditch. One of the things we're going to be looking at is if we can actually feasibly treat that water prior to addressing the source area. So we're gonna be collecting flow data. We're gonna be collecting concentrations during various rain events, after various rain events, to see if we can actually treat that. That ditch, my understanding is that ditch runs along Route 430 and eventually discharges into Mud Creek. We have collected samples in Mud Creek. Once it gets to Mud Creek, it dilutes very quickly. We don't really like to use the solution to pollution's dilution, but it is diluting quite quickly, so once it gets into Mud Creek, it's really not an issue at this point. I'll get this to work eventually. There we go. So this is really just a timeline. Pretty much from May to July of this year, you will see DEC trucks, you'll see our contractors, drilling rigs out there drilling these wells. But that's the rough time frame. We do have to get some access agreements in place, things like that, to go on people's properties. Okay, so that's the Mayville. I think that's a positive thing that we're doing over there. And like I said, it'll take us a while to compile that data, but eventually that will culminate in a remedial investigation report, and we will then put that out to the public. So if you want to see or read a long, boring engineering report, it will be there for you to read. But there will be summaries in there to make it a little bit easier. Probably more applicable to what people want to hear about, herbicide permits for this year, 2025. So we have been working, I personally have been working very closely with CLP and their consultants going back all the way to November to make sure that we are in a position that the process for and the administration of actually issuing herbicide permits as well as Article 24 wetland permits does not impede us from actually doing treatments this year. So we started way back in November. There are some formal letters that we just sent. We were all aware, those involved were aware that those letters were coming out. So we're all pretty much in lockstep with how this is proceeding this year. Curly leaf pondweed, this is the most pressing issue because we would like to, and CLP would like to have that treated before May this year. Again, we want to treat it early. There's less biomass, there's less dead dying vegetation, there's more opportunity for native vegetation to take its place. Early. That's what we were all focused on this year. So these are the applications we received for curly leaf pondweed. Something different they proposed this year. We did not propose this. CLP's consultants proposed this, or the town's consultants proposed this. We will be using Clearcast, which is a different herbicide and not Aquathol. We at DEC, our aquatic biologists were very pleased to hear that we were doing that, apparently, and I'm not the expert, you can ask Rob or somebody else down there, but apparently this is a systemic herbicide, not a contact herbicide, so it's a little bit more selective. It's also making sure that that we're not building up resistivity in these plants, using the same chemical year after year. So our aquatic biologist who really deals with our herbicide treatments was pretty happy to hear that they had proposed to use that. And then we got permits from the town of Ellery, town of Ellicott, town of Busti. You can see the acreages, 212 acres in the town of Ellery, 90 acres in the town of Ellicott, and 161 acres in the town of Busti. Now that's the proposal. As I've said before, we go out there before any treatments. We make sure that the target species actually exists there before we approve it. So most likely, these acreages will go down. Sometimes they go down significantly. It depends, but this is what was being approved. So this is what we're working off of. There was an article apparently in the local paper today indicating how the Article 24 wetland permitting is going to throw all of this off track, and we're not going to be able to do these treatments, and the lake's going to be a mess. And I really don't know where people get information from, because that's not the case. So we had the Article 15, which are the herbicide permits, long ago. We've been working with CLP. We received 2 of the 3 Article 24 wetland permits last Friday. I've instructed our staff to do the completeness evaluation on that. Once that completeness evaluation done, we are obligated to have a 15-day public comment period on those wetland applications. We're going to hope to start that comment period. I don't think it's got to be posted in the EMB. That's only every Wednesday. So probably not this Wednesday. The following Wednesday, it'll be posted in the EMB, 15-day public comment period. And hopefully by the middle of April, we will be in a position to issue those Article 24 permits. Now, I say that as though we're just trying to push those permits through. Our staff, without the actual Article 24 permits, I've asked our staff to start reviewing this several months ago, so that we knew we were going to be up against a timeline pretty good to review these. And there are some things that came out of it, right? Article 24 requires us to look much more closely at rare, threatened, and endangered species. So I'm told, according to Heritage, which is a database that we use, that there is the Hills pondweed, which apparently, again, I'm not an aquatic vegetation guy, but Hills pondweed, which is a threatened species in New York State. So we're going to address that by requiring, in most years, that treatments for pondweed, this pondweed comes later, starts growing later than the actual pondweed the invasive pondweed we're trying to target. So we're going to require that those treatments be done before May 1st. If there's really late ice and all of the pondweed grows later, we may be able to push that out a little bit. We're going to be able to do that May 1st. Now, to be honest with me, my staff came to me a little bit nervous because they know that I don't like things that kind of throw off what we're trying to do. And I said, no, that's actually a good thing because we want to treat early. And it puts us on a schedule, as well as CLP and the towns, to treat pondweed early. Past years, we've treated it way too late, and it just created problems. And it's really nonsense. We need to be ahead of the game. I do believe, even with the added requirements of Article 24s, we're probably in a better position this year than we have ever been. So again, that's a credit to CLP and their consultants, as well as to DEC staff. So Eurasian milfoil, I have not really addressed any of this yet because we are hyper-focused on pondweed, because this comes later in the year, so we'll have a little bit more time to work through this. But for Eurasian milfoil, again, the town of Ellery asked to treat 102 acres, town of Ellicott, 83 acres. Again, we'll go out before treatment, verify it's actually there before we actually do the treatment. So I think we're in a good position. I think we've met our obligations under Article 15, the herbicide permit. We met our obligations, or meeting our obligations under the wetland permit. The sky didn't fall. I think treatments will still happen, and we should be in a good position. Okay, wetland regulations. So where are we with wetland regulations? So again, I know there's a lot of it. I do joke on a lot of this, but I know there's a lot of anxiety. Trust me, I understand that anxiety. I am not a big government guy. I have wetlands that are going to be impacted on personal property that I own, so I understand the complications of a 100-foot adjacent area. I truly understand everybody's concerns, so I would never, ever stand up here and say, you know, what are you guys worried about? This is ridiculous, right? I understand your concerns. Those concerns I really think are rooted a lot in the unknown about what's going to happen and how this is actually going to unfold. We have been criticized. Apparently, somebody said in a meeting that we're building the plane as we're flying on it, or as we're flying it. I personally don't like when people do that, because we have given hours-long presentations and we're trying to be as open and honest as we can, and people nitpick exactly what we say and say, "Ha ha, gotcha." But that's not the case. We've been regulating wetlands for 50 years, since 1975. Our staff knows the regulations, the requirements. None of those regulations that make a wetland have changed. The only thing that's changed is the amount of wetlands that we're regulating. And what we're building as we're flying are the million different iterations of everybody's, nuanced differences and applications, and how are we going to build a process that's equitable, that's consistent, but yet still take into account, so that we're not complete bureaucrats, still take into account the nuances of everybody's different project and the nuances of everybody's situation. I'll give you an example of that, how things have morphed. So to start out, if you have a project, you think you have wetlands on or near your property, you need to submit a parcel JD, jurisdictional determination. And you can do that online. You submit your information to DEC. We have 90 days to get back to you. All you get from that is a letter that says, yes or no, we think that we have jurisdiction, that there's regulated wetlands on or near your property, and your parcel, that's why it's called a parcel, whatever that parcel is, may be impacted by those wetlands, right? Now, you send that into Albany. To be equitable, they go in order as they receive them. Well, they've received 1,000 of them, and they're working through them as hard as they can. So in a very bureaucratic world, we would say, okay, get in line, Chautauqua Lake. We'll tell you when you have your, when you have your jurisdiction, pondweed, time frame would have passed, everything else. So what we need to build when we're flying is how are we going to address this so that, so that we're addressing the concerns of the residents around Chautauqua Lake. So we raised concerns that that process is not going to work for us. Like, we need to know whether the herbicide applications that we're doing, and this is only specific to herbicide applications, we have to act on that. We got an Article 15 application. We know wetlands are going to be part of the process. We have to act on that. We can't wait. So central office said, okay, we will change that process. We will delegate to the regions the ability to make that jurisdictional determination. You don't have to wait for us in Albany to do that. As soon as they gave us the ability to do that, that's when our letters went out last week or the week before the 3 towns saying, listen, you need to submit Article 24 permits. Individual permits, submit Article 24. The other general permits are not available yet. They're still in public comment. You need to do that, right? So that went out. We changed the process. We're adjusting as we go. And that comment about building the plan as that's what that's referring to, is that we don't want to be wholly bureaucratic. So we sent out those, because I need those applications back. Even before we sent out those letters, I called CLP's consultants, or the town's consultants. I lump them all together, the town's consultants actually, and said, listen, start preparing your Article 24 applications. You're going to need to get them to me as soon as we send you those letters. You need to be ready to do it. We got 2 of the 3 applications last Friday. Like I said, the one we're waiting for, I believe, a supervisor or something to sign it, but we are prepared to make sure that we can move through those Article 24 permits. I don't think it was really that big of a deal. The other concern is that, oh my goodness, DEC just made a determination that the wetlands exist in front of all of our properties, anywhere where they suggested. Again, you just got to keep it. We made a determination based upon an application that we received for herbicide treatments. That's what that determination was made. Well, DEC, how did you make that determination? Did you go out? Did you delineate it? Did you do this? No, because I don't have time to go out and delineate it. If you want me to do that, we can do that. But now we're to the middle of summer. I couldn't do that, right? So we said, it's kind of logical. If you're going to treat an area with herbicides, you're only going to treat it if there's aquatic vegetation there. If there's aquatic vegetation there, it's going to be a wetland. So we made the leap to say, yes, that's a wetland, specific to move this process forward for herbicide applications. It doesn't mean that all the upland properties are in that adjacent area and are doomed from now until eternity, and you can't do anything that's not the case at all. That's not what we're trying to achieve. We're not an I gotcha trying to screw anybody or make it more complicated for you. So that's where we are in terms of at least, the wetlands for the herbicides. So you would submit that jurisdictional determination. Let's say we are off. I probably have some slides here. So let's say now you have something, you're going to put on a major addition onto your house or something like that, right? So what would be your process? You submit the jurisdictional determination. Within 90 days, you'll get it back from us. Yay. In that instance, we would actually send people out to do if you got a positive yes, and you most likely will get a positive letter because you're on a lake that has subaquatic vegetation, yes, we think we may have jurisdiction there. You would then request, and there would be information in there, please request a site-specific delineation of the wetlands that may be impacting your property. We would send staff out. We would do that site-specific delineation. It may take us a little bit because we have to do this for everybody, put you in order. We would do that site-specific delineation. Maybe there are no wetlands there. We would then say, you're good to go. We don't need to be involved anymore. If there are wetlands there, we would inform you that there are wetlands. You need to submit us information on your project. Where is your project going to happen relative to these wetlands, and what is your project? And we would then evaluate that and say, listen, can you move it out of the adjacent area? Well, no, because my entire property is in the adjacent area. Okay, you can't move it in the adjacent area. Well, what are the impacts to the wetland? I don't know, my house is already here, I'm building a deck, I'm building an addition. Okay, so there are minimal impacts. We would then write you a permit and say, feel free, build your addition, because there are no significant impacts. Now, if you're putting in a dock, same thing, we would go through that same process. We may say, now again, I know nobody likes bureaucrats telling them what to do, but we may say, does your dock have to be that long? Can you move your dock to this side of your property? Can you do, these are the kind of things that we walk through, but it doesn't mean you're not going to get a permit. Is it a hassle? Absolutely. I'm not going to tell you it's not a hassle as to not having to get it. But is it the end of the world? It's absolutely not. It's not dooming your properties. Again, we've been doing this successfully for 50 years. And it's the same process. None of that is going to change. In all honesty, and I don't really want to tell you this, but I think we have provided some inaccurate information before in the idea that you need to have 12.4 acres of contiguous wetlands on Chautauqua Lake, right? And this irked me a little bit because our staff did not inform me of this until a little bit more recently. But so for those who know, right, if you're in an urban area, you're in a flood-prone area, or if it's a wetland of unique if it's unique in an important wetland, there's no size limitation to it. Because Chautauqua Lake is a source of drinking water, that makes it any wetlands within Chautauqua Lake, and if that's the whole lake or the North Basin, because that's where I still have to work through that. But if you're in a wetland that is a source of drinking water, it automatically makes it a Class 1 wetland. A Class 1 wetland is considered, that's if you have vegetation there. It doesn't mean the whole lake is a Class 1 wetland. Where there's vegetation, it's going to be a Class. If it's a Class 1 wetland, it is, by definition, an important and unusual wetland. Therefore, there is no size limitation to the wetland itself. It does not have to be 12.4 acres of contiguous vegetation. I apologize for that. That was inaccurate information that I gave you based on information that I had. But I know that probably irks some people, but that's where we are. And to be honest with you, I'm just trying to give you the information that we have as it comes in. So these slides, again, I think these are just a repeat of kind of what we talked about last year. Some jurisdictional, new construction, if you're cutting vegetation, clear cutting vegetation, if you're applying herbicides. No, if you have 6 rose plants and you put herbicides on your, I don't care about that. Please do not tell me or submit an application because you're putting a little bit of herbicides. Yes, could we technically enforce upon? Yes. Would we ever? Absolutely not. Be like going 1 mile an hour over the speed limit and expecting to get a speeding ticket. But if you're going to have a wholesale application of pests, yeah, you might want to consider that. Process, this is what we said, jurisdictional determination. We have the JD process, then we would determine it. If there's potential for wetlands to be there, we would then come out and do a delineation, and then we would know for sure if there's wetlands there, and then we could walk you through the rest of that process on how you submit a permit. So when you request a jurisdictional determination, you can do it via a website. We ask for some very basic information. Here's your name, your last name, your property ID, contact phone number. So there's some basic information we request. You then get in line. Our central office staff will then give you let you know whether we believe that your parcel could potentially be regulated. General permits. So we have 8 general permits, is my understanding, that we have out there. A lot of them have to do with utility work, stream crossings for timber harvesting, things like that. Here's the list of at least 7 out of the 8. My understanding, 7 are still out to public comment. We have gotten a lot of comments on them. So they've extended the comment period on 7 of them till the end of April, at which point we will then review public comments. If there's substantial comments that substantially change the actual general permits themselves, they will need to go back out to public comment. So this process is ongoing. I know we talked a lot about general permits. This process is ongoing. But hopefully, I can't give you an exact date when these will be issued, but I'm hoping by the end of May that these general permits, barring some really unforeseen, hopefully earlier than that, but I don't want to be too optimistic, that these general permits will be ready. And a lot of like your basic, some basic work you'd want to do on your house would be covered under the general permit. And essentially, the general permit, if you meet the requirements of the general permit, you send it to us. It's just easier for us. Yes, we've met these requirements, then we would issue your permit. So it's just a little bit of a simpler process. There's no environmental assessment forms associated with it, which are associated with it. There's no public comment period associated with it, which we have to do with an individual permit. So it just makes the process a little bit simpler. Here are the draft permits, actually. Housing development, stream crossings for timber harvesting, natural gas utility maintenance. There's shallow weedy lakes. That's the one that we're most interested in. That's a general permit. And if you need any more information on wetlands, we have a lot of information on our website. You can find out that information here. I'm gonna go one step. I know the senator and assemblyman said, please, if you're having issues with something and you're not getting a permit, or you don't know the process, or you think DEC's a pain in the ass, or whatever your concerns are, you don't have to work through them. You can call me directly, or you can send me an email. Again, don't send me an email saying we submitted our permit application yesterday. Where is it? I can't address that. But I mean, seriously, if you really feel like either you're confused, or you're waiting for your permit, you're waiting for your jurisdictional determination, you're not clear what the process is, you can just reach out to me. I'm the source. All they're going to do is come to me anyway. So you can reach out to me. I'll either put you in contact with one of our staff. If you're not getting satisfaction from that staff person, certainly then I will moderate that conversation. We're trying to make it as easy as we can. Okay, I probably took up more than my fair share of time, but I'm sure you will have questions. We will wait until the end. I hope I answered some of them, though. Thank you.
Hello. Do you all need a stretch because you've been sitting for a long time? Like if you need to wave or do anything, feel free to stand up. If you leave, I might feel a little hurt now that Chad's done with the wetland thing. But quick correction, Chad said that the public comment period on those 7 permits that are still out ends at the end of April, end of March. We haven't extended it into April. And I will say, we didn't mention, so last year we cleared out as many backlog permits that we had in our wetland program by the end of the year, so that anyone was covered under the old law got to be covered under the old law, and they were all set so that they didn't have to deal with any of this uncertainty. We have hired new staff at the regional level in our ecosystem health group so that they can get out and help with delineations. We have increased our folks in our permit group. We continue to prioritize that. We work on good process so that you have a good experience with your government. We are public servants and you are the public that we serve. And so we are doing everything we can to make this as seamless a process for you. And we are learning as we go through about what we can make better, and more efficient, but we really are doing our best to make sure that as this law gets implemented, you have as good of an experience with the DEC as you have ever had. I get to talk about some of the fun stuff, which is that so much of this issue around macrophyte growth and around HABs, which really impact your experience of the lake, my experience of the lake, boating, swimming, fishing, all those other things, is driven by nutrient growth. And we have been so lucky to be working with our partners at the county and the Jefferson Project and the Institute and at the Corps of Engineers to continue doing this work around nutrient management. It is the critical pathway that we have to address. So, way back in 2012, DEC worked with many of you to estimate phosphorus loading. This was not a precise science. The information that we now have, through Jefferson Project and others and all the other work that's been happening through all the researchers on the lake has helped us to really iterate on this thing. But having perfect science was not a barrier to getting to work. And I'm looking at Pierre, and I can't thank the county, the Department of Health, and every single municipality enough. You all have invested in wastewater infrastructure to keep septic waste out of the lake, and it is an absolutely critical first step in taking care of lake health. That's been a major driver for nutrients. It always was. That's, it's there. And so getting that out of the system was critically important, and just a huge amount of funding that has been spent both by the state through our grant programs, through our financing programs, through your municipal budgets, through you as ratepayers and taxpayers to really address water quality through a really high quality wastewater management system. So every time you feel like you're in the same conversation that you may have had 20 years ago, you're not. Because 20 years ago, you didn't have this level of investment completed in the lake. You're just now in that little last stretch up in the upper kind of northeast corner. And I just want to take a minute to celebrate your good work. Wastewater is underground. It's not fun to talk about. Most municipalities are behind on it across the nation, probably across the globe. And you've done the hard work, so that will be a major investment. And then the work that the Jefferson Project and the watershed conservancies and everybody else, they're doing to do good land practices in the upper basin to help reduce the stream of nutrients coming in, new nutrients coming into the lake, has also been critically important. You're all doing the work. Over time, you will start to see these impacts in lake health. We are now starting to focus on the thing that has been the black box, if you will, which is to really start dealing with the question about internal loading. Where do you point this thing? Okay, oh, sorry, this was just, at a minimum, the state has spent over $25 million on watershed and water financing within the basin. It's actually a little bit higher. I realized that, but it was pretty close, 25 million in jazz. And we continue to make investments through our wastewater financing agencies, through grants in Chautauqua Lake. I can't say this enough on behalf of the county and on behalf of the governor's office. The governor invests in Chautauqua Lake. There are lots of tiny other lakes that, never see this kind of investment. Again, okay. So the next step on a TMDL is to do what they call a watershed implementation plan. That is an EPA term. I'd rather call this a nutrient management plan because watershed stuff can cover all kinds of other things. So I'm going to say nutrient management plan, but this is the technical EPA language that we use. So we're going to be kind of looking at, okay, so you've done projects that have been dealing with nutrients. Where are we at? What is the estimated impact those have had on that earlier estimate? We're looking at kind of how land use has changed. We're looking at the projects, again, that you've implemented. We're going to be talking to you if we've missed the mark. Is there another source of phosphorus that we've learned through the Jefferson work or through work for the researchers that are on the lake that maybe wasn't part of the original formula? Because those are 2012, the modeling is not what it is today, right? So we're better scientists, we have better understanding, we have better tools. And then we're going to do some studies to fill in the gaps where we know we don't have enough information. And then look for recommendations for what the next generation of projects really need to be in order to deal with particularly internal nutrient loading. I never talked a bunch about internal loading until I got to DEC and was talking about, Chautauqua Lake. You probably are all good at it, but it's essentially the nutrients that are bound up, in the sediments in the bottom of the lake. That's an oversimplification. And DEC is particularly concerned about stuff that's happening under anoxic conditions, and we are really very, very happy that Jefferson is looking at what happens through mechanical resuspension conversations. Both of those pieces of information are part of the same puzzle that we need to figure out next. But when we did those estimates on nutrients way back in 2012, 25% in the North Basin was supposedly coming from sediments, over 50% in the South Basin, 55% was coming from those sediments. And that's a really important thing if we want to actually particularly help the South Basin where you have so many issues with algae and HABs. And that estimate process was essentially, they figured out almost everything else, and that was the leftover. And we assumed it was part of internal loading. So it was, that's kind of was the best practice at the time. We weren't trying to shortchange things, but it allowed us to start work on the other components of the pie. But now we have to deal with the sediments. So DEC has already started. We had funding from the governor's budget to begin this work. We have a grant, we have a contract with Ramble Engineering and a subconsultant. They will be out in the lake this summer, out and looking at collecting water chemistry, temperature, DO, sediment chemistry, and bathymetry information in order for us to better understand those internal sediment nutrient loads. They're going to be looking at both basins. They're looking across seasons and time, focusing on phosphorus, but a whole range of other parameters as well. And look at a high-level overview about what can we do about it. If somebody gave me a big bag of money, or a crypto account dedicated to Chautauqua Lake tomorrow and said, go clean up the sediments, we don't have the information to actually do something with that. And so I can't say how much it's going to cost or what the technique or where we would do an intervention or what kind of intervention. And so that means that we're still behind where we need to be if we actually want to solve for internal nutrient loading. So this is our next first step. So we're going to get out there, we're going to confirm what we know about sediments across the lake, and we're going to do a high-level analysis on what techniques are out there in the engineering community and in the lake or in the sediment kind of nutrient world for dealing with them. We expect that we're not going to have one solution that's the right fit for the whole lake. It might be that we have to do, sometimes it's hypolytic withdrawal, sometimes it might be dealing with a chemical treatment, it might be a physical sediment removal in targeted areas if that's strategic. But we're going to run the numbers. How big is the area? How deep is the problem? What is the probable route? Do we have 3 options that we can look at? And we will use then that as the basis for a more detailed engineering plan in order to deal with those sediments. We absolutely have to work with you all on this. These projects are not just done by the state of New York. We will need local partners to go through this. But this has really been the staff's priority because we don't want this to be Groundhog Day for Chautauqua Lake. When I first took my job, within the first week, somebody said, Chautauqua is dealing with the same set of macrophyte issues that were documented in the press at least 50 years ago. And so the community's frustrated and tired for dealing with the same set of macrophyte issues that have been documented for this lake for a very long time. Good news, you've done the hard work of sewering. Pierre, thank you. It's not fun. And now we're going to try to get at this next layer of the onion. We're really pleased to also support non-point source pollution reduction through the project applications that come to the state for WQIP and other funding sources. So that's that piece. And now I get to end on a high note. Chad took all the flack. So that was generosity for him. And truthfully, he said we did the coin toss, but it's the way that we split up our work between the two of us. He spends more time on wetlands than I do because he oversees our natural resources group. But he gave me fisheries to be able to end on a high note, so I will give you this. The Chautauqua Lake fishery, despite all of our frustration, is still absolutely world-class, and we are so pleased. The muskie population is above average right now. This is one of our techs pulling out a 51-inch, 40-pounder this past summer. It's an enormous fish. So, every time that we worry about the fish are apparently very, very happy with everything that we're doing right now. The walleye is about at average in terms of abundance. We are hoping, I know there's concern on walleye, we are hoping that we're going to have a good brood season this year given the higher ice cover that was happening on the lake this winter. This is not, we're watching trends. Typically when we've had better, classes, it's after a higher ice incident on the lake. So hopefully better ice cover this year. We'll have hopefully better results going forward. Bass, we don't assess every year, but in several very, very successful tournaments on the lake this year, everything seems to be going well there. And right now it sounds like everyone's just watching for perch and bluegill and crappie showing up. I think have already been getting caught out in Mayville, and we're hoping for a good season. So, for those of us who like to get out and fish this lake, we're really in good shape right now according to our fisheries team. So that's it for me. And again, we have fact sheets on the internal loading, on the wetlands law, on the PFAS site, but also have really wanted to create that Chautauqua specific website so that you can get information directly from us on anything that we're working on at any time. Our door is always open to you. And we come down here all the time. We have staff that are right here all of the time. We really do want to make sure that we're working in partnership with you as community to care for this lake.
Thank you. So just a few things to address as well. And again, I've been in office now. This is on year 6. We've been listening to, since 2022, the wetlands regulation, and I will tell you that the DEC's position has not wavered. The same message we heard day one is the same message we heard today. So with the advent of technology, to clarify, there are actually 7,850 ponds, lakes, or reservoirs in the state of New York. So we are focused on our beauty in front of us, but There's a lot of other people that have beauties as well. But again, a lot of great work. Just a couple of things. So, Chad had mentioned the PFAS. This is a growing concern across the United States. In clarification, so 3 months into my term, we had, and it's the 5-year anniversary. I'm sure most of you have it on your calendars, right? March 15th was the day of infamy, I called it, here in Chautauqua County, where we declared a shutdown for the COVID pandemic. 5 years ago, that moved along rather quickly. Only 8 weeks we were shut down, but it took almost 2 years to open back up. Having said that, I had just gotten down, I was invited to Washington, D.C. to focus on the vaccination program, the rollout Operation Warp Speed. We were invited to the White House. I got home. My wife did not want me to come home. I was going to be quarantined at a local motel for 3 days. And at 9:30 at night, I got a call from the Department of Health. You got to shut down the drinking water in Mayville. We can't do anything more. But I'm like, whoa, it's 9:30 at night. Let's pump our brakes. 2 weeks before Christmas, mind you, we're going to shut down drinking water in Mayville. Obviously a growing concern, but we took it in stride, worked diligently with the DEC. They've been great. Uniquely enough, we knew this was a problem, and this is a positive note for anybody who's worked with the state of New York. We reached out. We said they noticed we did have a problem with PFAS. Levels were too high. We needed to get some charcoal scrubbers. They came in. We said, well, we need about $800,000. The state went through the process. We put in permits, et cetera. Okay, you have your $800,000. Well, I think we're going to need $1 million. Okay, you got it. That's a problem, because if the state reacts that fast to something, we know that it's a serious issue. So again, on behalf of myself and everyone, the DEC was incredible to work with. The source was, we believe right now, was a one weekend. It was a training weekend. Actually, it was a New York State fire course that took place. There may be other, as Chad said, we're looking to do the investigation, that what other sources of PFAS through firefighting foam was engaged. But right now, we do know up on top of the hill, it's actually behind the Mayville offices right there, Chautauqua offices, the Mayville School. And Chad and his group have been great to work with. And we've worked right along with them, along with the village, Mayor Siper and his group. The permits, as Chad said, is a constant collaboration and partnership. There is no time where the DEC sits back and just takes their sweet time trying to get these permits. And as Chad said, we're in a situation now where he's asked his group, go ahead and start looking forward and trying to get things accomplished a little bit faster. So again, people can get concerned with state bureaucracy, and obviously even here with the county. But unfortunately, some of those things are built in. But it's because of the work with Chad and the DEC and Julie. They've really done a great job of moving things forward. As we have said, and we will say this again, Julie gave us great credit, and I do, as a collective, take credit. We have phase 2. Tom Walsh, who was our director of South Center Chautauqua Lake Sewer District, was here earlier. He had to leave. We have begun and broke ground on phase 2 of our sewer extension around Chautauqua Lake. This is going to be from, if you're driving up to Mayville, you'll see it right around the Wells Bay area, a lot of equipment. Thank you to Raleigh Kidder for assisting in a staging area. I believe he and his son-in-law helped with the property there, so we have a staging point for all of the infrastructure that needs to go into the ground as phase 2 begins. Northrop was the successful bidder on that, and progress has already begun. We have, at this point, begun process on phase 3, which is the last and final piece of the puzzle of sewering Chautauqua Lake around its entirety. That will be going out this Wednesday at our legislature meeting. There'll be a vote for a public hearing, and then after that, we will move forward with the process, looking for funding and then submitting applications for funding. Very excited, as you've heard. Phase 2, we did have applications in, and we received a great deal of funding, so we're excited for that project, and we feel confident that phase 3, this last piece, we'll end up getting the funding we need. We're very confident in the relationship with the DEC, and the governor will make this possible. This is no short feat. This has been a long time in the making, and I've jokingly said it, and I'm just about ready to head out to purchase 2 couplings. as the East met the West, when the railroads met in Promontory Point, they drove a yellow spike. I told Pierre, who's been doing this for a long time, and Raleigh Kidder, who's been a long-time champion for completing the sewers, they will each get a golden coupling as a presentation once we finally get this last piece completed. But, you know, joking aside, this is huge. This is, you know, a great undertaking, but a dedication to the cleanliness of Chautauqua Lake, and really excited about that. As Julie said, the fisheries. You know, the best part, I thank Don Emhart, who stepped out. Don's in the back. Don was the engineer and one of the designers of the beautiful ice castle, and thank God for Mother Nature, we had the biggest and I feel the most beautiful ice castle in the nation. The governor saw me at the State of the State. She goes, "How are you dealing with all this snow, county executive?" I'm like, it's money from heaven, the way I see it. Our snowmobile trails have been open, very abundant. And if you went as far as, even as recent as last weekend, we have our own little village right out there off of the shores in Mayville, and the ice fishing huts were abundant. And I dare say they probably fished up until the last day. So really, the fisheries here in Chautauqua Lake are amazing. You probably don't want to tell any young kids that there's a 51-inch, 40-pound fish swimming along the shores underneath in Chautauqua Lake, but nonetheless. You know, just a real quick piece. I know the focus of this is Chautauqua Lake, but we are so blessed to have Lake Erie shoreline right to our north. I was at the National Association of Counties and was asked to be on a Great Lakes caucus. There are 8 states that border Great Lakes. And amazing, just a few numbers of how impactful the lakes are. We estimate here we're right around $500 million a year annually in revenue and economic impact to Chautauqua County. Lake Erie and the Great Lakes region is the 3rd highest GDP in the world. United States, China, and the Great Lakes region. $6 trillion of economy goes through the Great Lakes. So we are blessed, along with Chautauqua Lake, but also blessed to have another huge body of water to our north that provides a great deal of clean water. And that's actually 21% of the world's fresh water, and we're right on its shores. So moving right along, a little ahead of schedule, but we do have Dr. Marion Divers, and we will have a presentation by the Army Corps of Engineers. Somebody had asked me in the back, how long ago did it take for this process to happen? 10 years. Things don't move quickly, but for 10 years, this was designated an aquatic ecosystem restoration project, and it took that long of trips to Washington, sitting down with Senator Schumer, Senator Gillibrand, Congressman Reed, Congressman Langworthy, and making sure our voices were heard. We are the only New START program going on in the United States right now, so hats off to the Army Corps. Congratulations, again, thanking Congressman Langworthy for his endeavors, and again, as he said, working across the aisle with Senator Schumer. But make no mistake, this is no small project. You know, we've begun the process. The study will take somewhere between, we're hoping less than a year and a half, less than 18 months. We are very confident that the science we've already conducted will help limit that time and the amount of money it's going to cost moving forward. At that time, the Army Corps will then come back with a recommendation. And again, as Congressman Langworthy said, he is committed to getting that funding to get this project underway. So a long time coming. And this is, and we say an Army, they came in, we had a charrette dealing with our in-lake partners right now, the in-lake stakeholders. People were doing research involved in in-lake activities. I think the Army Corps had almost as many people as we had in attendance. Biologists, fishery specialists, chemists, biologists, economists. I mean, they leave nothing short when it comes to this study. So without further, just to go back real quick before we end there, we do remind everybody your cards. Orange cards were for for elected officials. The yellow cards were for Dr. Richardson. Green cards for Jefferson Project, if you have any questions. The red cards for the New York State DEC. And today, to complete us, will be the blue cards for the Army Corps of Engineers. If you have any of those cards that have not been collected, raise your hand. Those of you online, again, you can submit your questions to chqlake@chqgov.com, chqgov.com. So without further ado, and I know they're waiting online. And with our assistance from Justin, we now present Dr. Marion Divers and the Army Corps of Engineers.
Hello, thank you so much to the county executive and to the entire crew there at Chautauqua County. I appreciate your technical expertise and your ability to bring me there today. Thank you. I'm going to talk a little about the study progress. I think at this point, it's well known that the Army Corps of Engineers is involved in a project to help develop an implementation plan for the lake. So today we're going to talk and really start talking about what we've been doing since the project started. So I'm going to provide a project overview and focus on what is an aquatic ecosystem restoration first. The Chautauqua Aquatic Ecosystem Restoration Project, I'll provide just a little bit more information about that. And the Army Corps of Engineers planning process, we follow a very specific process to develop these feasibility plans. And then I'll talk after that about the progress we've made, including an overview of what was discussed at the Chautauqua Charrette, the Charrette outcomes and later refinements. And then we will also talk about the Future Without project. That information came out of that Chautauqua Charrette. It's the idea of what happens if nobody does anything. We will also discuss the next steps in the schedule. And a big part of that is really how you can get involved. We are counting this meeting today as a public participation and outreach meeting. We want to hear from you both on the blue cards that the county has so thoughtfully and organized for you, but also there's opportunities as you revisit these slides later or think more about what we said or the connection of what we are doing and the researchers and all of the work that's been done and how this will all collate. You can reach out to us, and I will provide a couple of different avenues for you to reach out to us, and I will show you what those avenues are later in the presentation. So first, what is an aquatic ecosystem restoration? That is the official title of this kind of study, and I wanted to emphasize what we can do as part of this study. Aquatic ecosystem is one of the primary missions of the Army Corps. This purpose is to restore aquatic ecosystem structure, function, and dynamic processes that have been degraded. And I see here that I've already used an acronym, so AER in the second bullet there. My apologies. That's short for Aquatic Ecosystem Restoration. The Corps uses a lot of acronyms, and I'm trying to be better about explaining them as I use them. So the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, as part of this primary mission, works to identify and enact activities to fully or partially reestablish the attributes of a natural functioning and self-regulating ecological system. For example, we may look to reestablish fish or wildlife species of concern that have been expatriated from a particular habitat region. We may focus on specific habitat types and try to enhance those, such as deep water habitat or shoreline habitats. We may work to enhance native or address invasive plant cover, and we work to establish connectivity between habitat types. For example, often fish need nursery regions where there are abundant food sources and cover from invasive or cover from predators, but then as they get older, they may need to move to other habitat types. So we look to see where those habitat types are and what connections we can make between them. So just to give you a quick overview about the project so far, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Pittsburgh District received congressional authorization to conduct a feasibility study through the Section 12016 of America's Water Infrastructure Act of 2018. So this is Public Law 115-270. It's a lot of numbers and a lot of words. I want to focus on 2018. County Executive Wendell spoke about the timeline that this has taken and the work that the county has put in to kind of bring this to this point. So it started even before that because it takes time to receive those congressional authorizations. For those of you that don't quite understand that process, myself included in that, a congressional authorization for the study gives us the permission to do it. It does not provide the funding. So after that authorization received in 2018, we received funding in early 2024 to begin the study. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and Chautauqua County signed what is called a Feasibility Cost Share Agreement, and I shorten that to FCSA. So pardon me if I do that unintentionally. On September 26, 2024, Chautauqua County agreed with this agreement to participate as the non-federal sponsor on this Chautauqua Lake Aquatic Ecosystem Restoration Study. So we held a scoping and planning charrette on January 8th and 9th, 2025, with the non-federal sponsor and the parties that are actively engaged in research or restoration work on and around the lake. And then since then, we've held a number of focused meetings and interagency meetings after the charrette to continue gathering data and soliciting input from the resource agencies. And this, I think, is really important. You know, the work that has been discussed today by the other researchers and stakeholders in this lake, the work has already been done. The hard part for the Army Corps team is walking into this new situation and trying to fully integrate all of this work, understand where we can slot that into our process and integrate it fully so that we are using and leveraging it the best we can. So this project will develop and compare alternative plans, evaluate the costs and benefits, and recommend a specific course of action to Congress. This will be recommended as part of the Chief's report, and then Congress may then authorize and fund the identified course of action for construction. The identified course of action is eligible for a cost share, so I want to emphasize that this will provide a significant cost benefit because the cost share varies, but generally 65% of this project will be federally funded and 35% will be locally funded. So there's a significant benefit to developing this project. I wanted to talk a little about this Army Corps of Engineers planning process. We employ, when we are developing these projects, a 6-step process where first we identify problems and opportunities, we inventory and forecast what is currently in the system and what will be the future condition of the system. We formulate alternative plans, we evaluate alternative plans, we compare those plans to each other, and then we select a plan that fulfills the mission and the requirements of the project. I wanted to show you here that stakeholder involvement is really at the center of this process. And at each point in the process, we are gathering more evidence and more information to inform the planning process moving forward. So it's iterative, we keep revising as we move, and it's risk informed. We want to know or understand throughout the process what information or analysis is necessary to make the next decision. We also want to know the uncertainty, likelihood, and consequences of project risks. So we maintain a list of risks as they're identified and try to understand what we need to do to mitigate those risks. I've talked a little about the charrette, the Chautauqua charrette that was held on the 8th and 9th. The first step in our process is really the need to learn about the area of interest. And I think I mentioned this earlier. Please understand, we are coming into this effectively blind and without all the knowledge that you have already, as residents, as researchers, as business owners, all of the information that you have gathered just by existing in this space. So we work to conduct a charrette to really build up this knowledge base for ourselves. And this is our first opportunity to do so. We also have read every report. All the community groups have been amazing to share every bit of information that they have collected, that they have gathered with us. So before the charrette, we worked hard to cram, I don't think that's the right word, but cram our brains with all of the information that we had. And then the charrette was a time for us to work with those active stakeholders to really integrate that knowledge. So a charrette is a meeting in which identified stakeholders in a project attempt to resolve conflicts and map solutions. So it's the first iteration of that planning process I showed you later. It originates from the French word charrette, in which a little cart was used to collect student submissions when they were due. Basically, you're working very hard to finish your submission, and then they come around with the cart, and you just throw it in the cart in whatever state it's in. So that's a very apt sort of metaphor for the brainstorming process that we employed as part of the charrette. All the submissions that people gave us from the community groups were consolidated and reviewed as a team to reach consensus on very specific topics. So I'm going to, now that I provided sort of this overview of the planning process, provide some specifics about the charrette outcomes and later refinements of those outcomes, and more on what we identified as the future without project condition. So the goal that we came to the charrette with as the PDT, or project development team, was to complete one iteration of this planning process. Again, this charrette was our first opportunity to really do a deep dive into the accrued knowledge about the lake, and participants in the charrette were the current groups doing active work in the lake. So the charrette goal was to complete one iteration. To do that, we developed problems, objectives, opportunities, and constraints. We outlined the existing conditions and the likely future condition, the future without project condition, which we sometimes shorten to FWAP. We sought to understand the existing data, the data gaps, and the analyses that had happened. We identified, brainstormed, and performed a basic screening of different management measures that could address those problems. And we also developed a very rudimentary initial array of alternative plans. So you can see the agenda. It was a very jam-packed 2 days. Participants worked. They didn't sit and listen to us talk. We engaged folks, and we really appreciated the time that all of you gave us. I'm sure some of you are in the room there. So I wanted to discuss some of those outcomes. We developed some problem statements. So here are the problem statements, and I apologize in advance. These next few slides are going to be very wordy, but please bear with me. I really wanted to let you hear what we discussed at the charrette and how the Army Corps will use this information to help us develop the project to address our specific aquatic ecosystem restoration mission and authorization. So the 3 problem statements that came out of this were sedimentation caused by shoreline and stream bank erosion, resulting from land development and agricultural practices along the shoreline and through the watershed, have impacted the quality and availability of aquatic and deep water habitats within the lake. High nutrient levels caused by internal and external loading resulted from wind and wave action within the lake, and runoff throughout the watershed have degraded optimal habitat parameters for native species and impacted biodiversity within Chautauqua Lake. Sedimentation, nutrients, and changing precipitation and temperature regimes have resulted in favorable conditions for the growth of invasive and nuisance macrophytes within Chautauqua Lake that threaten native species, impact local economies, and recreation opportunities. From this, we developed some general objectives, and those were to increase the quality of aquatic habitat located within Chautauqua Lake, to increase the quantity of available habitat within the lake, and to improve the connectivity of aquatic habitats within Chautauqua Lake. We also, as part of the charrette, identified opportunities. And these are not things that are directly objectives of the project, but rather these are co-benefits that may be realized through the implementation of a recommended plan. So some of those opportunities that we identified, including improving the water management plan for the lake, including understanding lake levels and hydrologic considerations, potentially, and I emphasize this for all of these may be realized. We may see an improvement in the ability of the community to withstand and respond to impacts from a changing climate and increased development over time with least harm done. We may be able to enhance recreation opportunities when compatible with this overall ecosystem restoration, increase the public education and understanding of the lake ecosystem, reduce maintenance costs for water supply infrastructure, reduce costs for existing management efforts, strengthen the economy of the region and provide benefits to all communities located around the lake, improve water quality within the lake, including harmful algal blooms, temperature, and trophic level index, and address flooding issues on upstream tributaries along the lake and to downstream communities. Again, these are not direct objectives of the study, but rather these are things that co-benefits that may be realized that we discussed with charrette participants. We also, as part of the charrette, identified some constraints and considerations. So constraints are things that must be avoided. For example, we cannot affect water levels that are required for recreation and maintained by Warner Dam. We can't impact the public use of the lake permanently. There may be temporary impacts for construction of identified measures. However, we cannot impact that permanently. We can't impact public and private water supplies within the lake, and we can't increase flooding in surrounding communities. We can also avoid, my slides are advancing without me. We also need to consider any negative impacts to the fisheries, and we need to avoid downstream flow requirements or we need to understand how any constraints associated with downstream flow requirements for utilities. Considerations that were identified really help us to inform the process. So existing conditions considerations that were identified include the current efforts that are undertaken or planned by others. And so we are working closely with the Jefferson Project, the county, the towns, the other researchers, the New York State DEC, the USGS, and others to consider all existing work that has been planned or is undergoing or is currently undergone, and how we can leverage that. We are also considering alternative formulation and designs. So for example, the type of habitat for which the PDT or the project development team should be designing. We are looking to really think about that carefully. We're also considering the impact of changing precipitation and temperature regimes on our design choices. It's all well and good to put something in place, but if it's going to be impacted by storms, then we need to be careful to ensure that that impact is mitigated now. We are also considering real estate. Are there areas that we need to avoid, or are there areas that we can focus our engineering solutions? For example, publicly owned land. That would be a better place to put a mitigation measure. We are also considering how dredging would affect the lake levels that are required for recreation or insect herbivory. Another consideration is the alternative comparisons and evaluation process. HTRW findings may affect the project feasibility and cost, and these are hazardous, toxic, radioactive wastes. So those waste, if they are in the sediment, for example, things classified as any of those, the Army Corps is not permitted to move forward on implementation of measures that may affect those until those are taken care of. So we need to understand that first. We are also considering what measures we might recommend that may require substantial operations and maintenance requirements that may be unsustainable. And there, of course, is consideration as to the uncertainty in the long-term macrophyte response as we move forward with this. And I want to emphasize that operations and maintenance, a lot of the work that needs to happen outside the Corps' ability to ensure the project is sustained in the future is a consideration for our project recommendations. I told you all that we also identified what we call the FWOP, or Future Without Project. What happens if no one does anything? We think about this carefully. We consider this outcome so that we have a baseline to compare our plan to. This is important. So, for example, we identified a number of Future Without Project considerations that are projected to continue, including that stream bank or shoreline erosion may continue due to agricultural and increased residential development. There may be increased runoff and sedimentation and continued nutrient issues, a decreased species diversity and abundance, a further loss of habitat and ecosystem function, degradation due to the harmful algal blooms, HABs, and nutrients, increased sediment that can cause the lake capacity to change. Hydrology will be influenced by climate trends such as higher water temperatures or changing precipitation patterns and less ice cover. Increased cover of invasive species. HABs could continue to create issues with drinking water and recreational use of the lake, and economic impacts from lost recreation dollars from rentals, gas, food, and other impacts to local businesses. So we pulled all of this information from the charrette participants and really then started to consider what management measures we would like to use to address these. And so here's a big list of the management measures that we brainstormed at the charrette. So if you look, there are some things in here that, for example, people are already doing. And there are some things that could be enhanced potentially or begun. And we are considering all of these different kinds of management measures as we move forward. So from the big list of management measures that are shown here, we then began the next part of the Army Corps process, which is to really start screening these management measures, identifying ones that are better completed by another group or is already being completed by another group, and or the extent of future O&M or operations and maintenance that would be burdensome on the community. All of these things are screening questions that we began to use to pare down that list of management measures that was a charrette outcome, the big list. And we developed a refined list of management measures that we are moving forward with for optimization and analysis now. These include dredging, nanobubblers, or other means of increasing the DO water column mixing, invasive species management from herbicides, mechanical, biological, diver-assisted section removal, native species plantings, wetland creation or preservation, either shoreline, floating, or riparian, shoreline improvements to remove or replace hard armoring, stream improvements, installing or improving vegetated buffers, stabilizing banks, nutrient inactivation, including chemical and natural means, potential aquatic passage improvements, Warner Dam, upstream tributaries, adjustments to the water management plan for Warner Dam, or installation of native mussels. I want to emphasize that we will spend the next period of time with this in this study analyzing these and determining how effective they will be and how they may be best employed. So those were the results of the Chautauqua charrette. Now I'm going to talk a little bit more about the next steps for the project and the schedule. And I've alluded to this already. We want to hear from you. I will go over how you can provide some input, and we will talk a little bit about the schedule. So the next phase of this project, as I mentioned earlier, is really the alternative in evaluation and analysis phase. This Plan formulation and impact analysis may take a year to a year and a half to complete. The array of alternative plans are compared against each other with emphasis on the outputs and effects of each plan. We will compare the beneficial and adverse effects of each plan, including monetary and non-monetary benefits. The PDT, the project development team, will be required to select a model, collect the data, and conduct what we call a cost effectiveness or incremental cost analysis, or a CEICA, to identify the National Economic Restoration Plan. So this is the plan that most benefits the mission of national economic restoration. We will conduct a high-level analysis of the impacts on the fish, wildlife, and habitat of alternative plans. Usually, this planning process is focused on flood risk management. And so in a flood risk management study, you want to make sure that your flood risk management measure that you select will not impact fish, wildlife, and habitat. And for this study in particular, we will also conduct this analysis, but of course, we are focusing on how to best help the fish, habitat, and wildlife throughout this plan. So this is not necessarily as big of a concern in this planning process in this study as it would be for other efforts. We will also identify ways to scale these measures or alternatives to avoid or minimize any negative impacts that we identify. So in this next phase, the PDT, the project development team, will evaluate all these alternatives and identify one as the tentatively selected plan. And we will release a draft integrated feasibility NEPA report, which is the National Environmental Policy Act, for public and agency review. So that's what we'll be doing over the next year and a half. And I think, here's where we really want to hear from you all. As I said before, stakeholder involvement is at the center of the graphic here, this conceptual model. It emphasizes that public and stakeholder engagement is an important part of our planning process. It's located at the center of our planning process for a reason. We really value and consider all public comments throughout the process. So what I'd like to talk about now is how you can provide input. We've established a website for the plan. I believe that the county has provided some handouts that have this link available on it. The link is shown there as well. On this website, there is a map where you can actually physically show us where you are talking about a problem existing. We really want to hear from the public on the map. Where have you noticed problems, recommendations for places to focus? We, again, have learned quite a bit, but we're always willing to learn more. There's also a project-specific email address. It's kind of a little bulky CELRP, which is our LRP is Lakes and Rivers Pittsburgh District, then Chautauqua AER at usace.army.mil. You can email your comments directly to us. And I wanted to show you the public website real quick and how this works. So if you click on that link and go to the Chautauqua Lake Aquatic Ecosystem Restoration Project website and scroll down, so the big red arrow just means to indicate to scroll down. And at the bottom of the web page, there is this button that is red. It says an interactive map of the Chautauqua Lake Aquatic Ecosystem Restoration Project. Click that button. And it brings up what I consider a really lovely, pretty exciting map interface. So here it brings up this screen where you can see the Chautauqua Lake watershed. And we have defined the watershed as the point to Warner Dam. So that's our area of interest that we're really focusing on here. You can zoom in, you can change the background, you can look at different areas of the lake. But what we really want to emphasize is this blue button in the lower left-hand corner of the screen where you can click, write a comment. And it brings up this comment interface where you can zoom into a point on the map and click it, which I did here. And I made something up, so please don't use this As an example, clearly I know there's not a lot of shoreline erosion here in the middle of the lake, but you can click on this point. You provide details, including the subject and more information about that. And this will be a living map document that we can use to track comments, but also understand concerns from the public over time. So that's how we would like to receive your feedback, either by email or by comments on the map. I also wanted to let you know that the first of multiple future public engagement meetings will be happening on April 9th. This will be a 2-hour virtual meeting from 6 to 8 p.m. Information about this meeting will be posted to the county's website and on the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Pittsburgh District social media accounts. An agenda and a WebEx link will be provided the week prior to the meeting, and comments will be accepted during this meeting in the chat or verbally at the meeting. We intend that the 6 to 8 p.m. timeframe will allow us to have essentially a short presentation about the project and then time for comments afterwards. We will spend about an hour doing that at 6 and then again at 7. So we will have 2 iterations of that sequence in order to allow people that may not be able to make it earlier to come later and talk with us. So this will be our first big public engagement meeting. I also wanted to note, going back to this graphic of the schedule that I showed earlier, at number 4 is when we release that draft report for public review. So 4, it will be a product milestone for this project. And I highlighted this because at this point, during this public review process, we will release the draft report for everybody and be sure to publicize the release with our partners at Chautauqua County. And also we will be holding in-person public meetings at the north and south basins of the lake and with the business community. And we will work with Chautauqua County to advertise those opportunities, those public engagement opportunities widely. So at this point, I will understand that the county has a system in place for questions and comments. So I'm going to stop sharing and I will end the slideshow, but I look forward to participating and accepting your questions and comments either through this evening at Chautauqua County or, right now through the blue note cards or through the web interfaces that I've described. Thank you.
Thank you, Marion. So if you do have a question for any of our panelists, or actually, excuse me, now for the Army Corps, it will be in one of the blue cards. If you would please raise your hand. Our staff is coming around. We do have several questions, so we are going to go through. Some of them are, the group has gone through and checked for redundancy. Some of the same questions have been asked, but we're going to just go right down the line. All of our speakers have microphones in front of them, so we're going to hit off some of these for the elected officials, as I'm the only one, but we'll kind of get a few of these out of the way. Somebody asked, where can we find email addresses and phone numbers for the politicians in support of bills 4692 and 3656? If you go on to if you Google either Senator George Borrello or Assemblyman Andrew Molitor, it will take you to their webpage, and they will have the contact information there, their emails and their phone numbers, whether it's the district office here or their office in Albany as well. So quick question. The next question, with potential budget cuts at the federal level, will the county lobby to maintain funding for the Army Corps and lake projects? This is something we do annually. I think we're setting up our trip right now. It looks to be maybe in April or May, just due to conflicts with everyone getting schedules together. But we continually advocate for the funding, and we will continue. This doesn't stop right now. It will not stop. Again, a couple of things. We're not, there's some uniquenesses in, criticisms of what's happening in the federal administration. We're looking at environmental protection. We do have an ally in Lee Zeldin, who has been a remarkable person that we've been able to have a relationship with over the years. So again, there are some connections we have. We're not making any promises, but I can guarantee you we will continue to advocate and lobby for continued funding for our projects, especially with the Army Corps. This is something we've been waiting for a long time, so it would behoove us not to push and make that continue the push for that. So for the Jefferson project, could you please identify your 2025 funding sources?
I believe, sorry, is this on?
Yep.
Thanks. I believe most of the funding is now coming to the state. I'm not privy to necessarily any of the behind the scenes thing with stuff where that came from, but I believe partially through the DC, but the governor's actions working with the, apologies, there's another agency that I'm failing to think of right now, the
Environmental Facilities Corporation.
Thank you, that's the one, Environmental Facilities Corporation.
Okay, thank you. So this again is something we've been working with the governor for, and she's been committed to for years. Another one for Jefferson. Are you looking into nutrient removal associated with herbicide use in addition to harvesting?
That may come into play. Right now, our goal for, at least for 2025, is more focused on the mechanical harvesting. Like I said, there could be things as we start to learn more and start to develop our strategies of what we're missing when developing our budgets that may come into play, but as of right now, that's not our goal for 2025 at least.
Thank you. For the DEC, I think you have the largest pile. I think this is a simple one. We can do this one. Do I need a permit to put in or take out my dock as a landowner?
Not if you've been doing it. If it's a new dock, then you would need a permit to put in a new dock. But if it's an existing dock, it's routine maintenance, so no.
Thank you. We have another one for, this may be several questions in a row. Please bear with us. One was Hills pondweed found in the North Carolina State University and Sunianta weed surveys? If not, how do we know it's actually there? Second, how were the 2025 treatment area positive JDs determined, and who requested the JDs? So we'll ask those two questions.
Well, regarding the NC State survey, we did not find it in the 24 survey.
Okay, thank you. And for Chad, how were the 2025 treatment area positive JDs determined, and who requested the JDs?
So I think I touched on that a little bit. Essentially, the JDs are inferred once you submit an Article 15 herbicide application permit. In order to process those permits, we have to make sure that all other applicable permits have been issued as well, which would include the Article 24 permit. And again, to speed up the process, we had to make a determination. That determination was based on the fact that we know historically that herbicides have been proposed to be treated in areas, obviously, where there is an expectation that there is subaquatic vegetation. And areas that will be treated will certainly have subaquatic vegetation, because we would not treat those areas if they did not. So logically, they would fall under Article 24 jurisdiction.
Thank you. One question here for the directed generally is, we will have the slides available online. They will be on the county website. So any of the presentations that were presented today, we have uploaded. They will be back. They will be on our countywide website. I'm guessing first thing Monday morning or thereabouts. Or later today? No, later today. Staff is efficient. DEC, when will the Chautauqua Lake specific general permits be ready?
So there is no Chautauqua Lake specific general permit. There is a permit that would be applicable to Chautauqua Lake in terms of shallow weedy lakes for herbicide application. And they are out to public comment until the end of March. I'll get that right this time, till the end of March, at which point we have to review the public comments, revise the general permits as applicable, and then decide whether those permits would need to be sent back out for public comment if there's substantial changes, or whether we could just issue them as they are if they're minor modifications. So I would say we're anticipating May. I'll say the middle of May, maybe the beginning of May, maybe the end of May, but we'll say the middle of May.
Thank you. One other question to follow up. Will all shorelines that are developed be able to have shoreline cleanup performed this year?
So that's a good point. Those entities that are doing harvesting and shoreline cleanup should contact either myself or our permit folks to get those conversations started. In order to harvest, this is new, we will be regulating harvesting this year because of the new wetland law. So we just need to start those conversations as soon as possible to make sure that we have everything in order so there is no delay in actually doing that type of work. But we're not anticipating there being any significant restrictions relative to that type of work.
Thank you. For Dr. Richardson, what percentage of biomass is milfoil compared to other species, Valenciaria, Elodea, in your fall surveys?
Well, that's a good question, and we don't break them down that way. So it's possible to break the data down that way, but we would need a little bit more information to do so. So with hydrilla, we've done this with hydrilla where we've taken plant samples, dried them down, and correlated that with a sonar signal. So if I was going to answer that question in the best way possible, we'd have to take samples out on Chautauqua of Eurasian milfoil, pondweed Valenciaria, and correlate that to the sonar signal. Now we could probably go in and roughly estimate plant biomass just from the sonar signal, but without that ground truthing, I couldn't say how accurate that may or may not be. But again, that's something we have not done, but I could talk to my crew and see if we could express the data in that way.
Okay, thank you. And how many days are the survey crew on Chautauqua Lake for the 1,000 points that you discussed?
So in an individual year, it's going to depend. We don't assign a specific number of days. They come up and they work until the points are done. It will depend on weather, so obviously they can move faster in good weather. It depends on plant biomass. The more biomass they're bringing in, the longer it takes to sift through it, and it depends on how many people we have up. So at times we'll have 2 crews and 2 boats, so maybe 5 people on the lake, and that's obviously faster than when we have a crew of 3 on an individual boat. But I believe in 24 it took us 8 days.
All right, thank you. Question for the DEC. Should potential home buyers apply for a JD designation? If so, will wetlands designation then have to be recorded in the sale?
A potential home buyer, I'm not going to get into the lawyering of home sales and what's required because it's way outside of my expertise. But there would be no reason to apply or to ask for a parcel jurisdictional determination unless you are actually going to potentially engage in a regulated activity. So the purchasing of a home is not a regulated activity.
Thank you.
Again, what realtors and lawyers require as part of that transaction is well outside of that.
Thank you. Also, the DEC, what determines an in-lake wetlands designation? Will they be marked off with buoys subject to traffic limitations and private weed removal?
No.
Thank you.
That we've had in Lake, and that's not a new development now. There have been areas of the lake that were subject to the law before the changes. So it's not an entirely new experience. And we've never buoyed them off.
Thank you. For the Jefferson project, Is the Jefferson Project 2025 study plan and scope of work available anywhere?
It should be available soon through the DEC. Because the funds are being facilitated through them, we have to develop what's known as a QAP, or a Quality Assessment Project Plan. So pretty much everything that's going to be done for 2025 will be documented in excruciating detail in those plans.
Thank you, Mark. Along with that, when will actionable recommendations for lake improvement be made by the Jefferson Project?
Our target is very soon. We hope that by the end of 2025, some of our nutrient budgeting and modeling will start to show some really critical and important things in the watershed. But I would say we would need the full 3 years of the project period to really drill down and find what we really want to find out about Chautauqua Lake and its watershed.
Thank you. This one's for Dr. Divers. Will the Army Corps of Engineers look into arsenic in the sediment? And if so, will they work on remediation?
The Army Corps will, if there is arsenic, we will try to figure it out, but we will not work on remediation. We cannot do that as part of an aquatic ecosystem restoration project. So that will need to be remediated before the Army Corps would be able to do any recommended measures.
Okay, thank you. For the Jefferson Project, are you considering the capacity of the wastewater treatment plants around the lake and how much they are contributing to the nutrient load when they are overloaded during heavy rains and other events?
I don't have a good answer for that at the moment. It would be up to our hydrologic and watershed modelers if they're going to incorporate that data. I hope that they would, but it depends on available information as well. So we'll need to figure that part out, I think.
Thank you. For the DEC, can the DEC protect Chautauqua Lake watershed from 600-foot industrial wind turbines aimed at Ellery and North Harmony?
I'm going to say that any new renewable energy projects are heavily regulated through very specific processes, and so we both have the Office of Renewable Energy Siting as well as internal groups within DEC that review projects through the permitting process when they come out. If you want to meet up with us later, we can, if there's the specific project, if there are specific concerns, we can look and see where it's at in the process and what you're concerned about in terms of lake health. And we can follow up with you after the meeting.
Thank you. Just a point of information. One of the things that, I can say this from my position, this is something that I am not in favor of. These wind turbines, especially somewhere in the watershed. Renewable energy does have its purpose in certain places. Within the watershed, a turbine is not, in my opinion, feasible. Again, this is my personal position. I'm not in favor of the wind turbines. We have not seen a significant amount of energy increase or energy going into the grid. We've heard more complaints and issues. Unfortunately, you're dangling money in front of people who may need it. So it's a very unique position. Many of these projects, be it solar or wind, are oftentimes started with one group, sold 2 to 3 times before the project even goes into operation, and creates a great deal of headache, concern, and stress. A myriad of issues arise with windmills, and there's all sorts of scientific data that proves that. But the amount, what's interestingly enough is, as Julie had said, is what's regulated are those, the windmills, the wind turbines. But uniquely enough, just a comparison, and this is not, I'm not saying this in regards to the DEC, but just the overall regulation. If you want to drill for oil and gas, you have to give the carbon footprint of every engine, combustible engine that is being used on the project, a truck, a drilling rig, a generator, whatever may be used. That is not required for any renewable energy source in New York State. And we know that there's a great deal of excavation that goes on with our wind turbines. There's also a great deal of trucks coming in and out. Concrete, I believe it's 900 cubic yards of concrete is used just for the base alone. So there's a great deal of carbon footprint going into the process and the construction of these renewable energy sources, but it's not regulated. but if you wanted to look at fossil fuels, it is. So again, I know this isn't something that the DEC weighs in on. They're actually having to just regulate what's happening, but it's a growing concern. What I do not want to see, and this is a personal position from my, as sitting here as the executive now, what I don't want to see is a littered landscape of solar fields that in 5, 10, 20 years are no longer working, and we're left with the remedy, the repercussions. Again, there's various other sources of energy around, but again, I can tell you I would not support any wind turbines, especially in Chautauqua Lake's watershed. Jefferson Project. How does the Jefferson Project modeling take into account the macrophyte density and nutrient loading from mass die-off of curly-lead pondweed in the midsummer?
It likely doesn't, at least at that specificity. I did mention during the presentation that we're going to start looking at the influence of macrophytes on things like bottom shear stress. But in these models, it's going to be more of something like a drag coefficient, right? So it's going to be a certain value that we can apply to it, and we can play around with sort of adjusting that coefficient and how it affects the movement of water, but it would never get to the specificity of a die-off of a very specific plant like that.
And to piggyback on that question, are there modeling taking into account the impact on water flow or water movement in the areas where the plants are most dense?
Yeah, so same sort of thing. That's where we can start to experiment with our hydrodynamic models, looking at the presence and the density potentially of the macrophytes and how they are inhibiting water flow, how they are limiting shear stress on the bottom, things like that. So that'll certainly be part of our process.
Excellent, thank you. Next, for the Army Corps, for Dr. Divers, are you looking at carp management as a strategy?
We brought it up at one point because we did learn about the I'm going to get myself into trouble here. We are considering all things. I don't know if that measure has been screened at this point. I would need to talk to our biologist.
Okay, thank you. I think one thing that those of us who've been around the lake, I forget when we did have a massive carp die-off here in Chautauqua Lake, would maybe look at studies, and I don't, any of our research panelists would probably assist in this, is what were the macrophyte levels prior to that die-off, what were the macrophyte levels after? Tens, I don't know, maybe, I don't want to say tens of thousands of, there were thousands of carp taken out of this lake by the tons in a die-off, and I don't know if that was ever determined as to what caused that. But we did have a significant die-off here in carp. So it'd be interesting to look at the studies that were conducted prior to that die-off and then what the results are after. Dr. Richardson, can you please expand on the relationship between plant decay, release of nutrients, and HAVs or harmful algal blooms?
So I would say that the theory there is that when plants senesce and start to decompose, that the nutrients that they had inside their stems are released into the water. I would also say that there hasn't been a whole lot of science done to prove exactly how much in the way of total nutrients would be in those stems and how much of that would be immediately released into the water. But I can give you, some observational data where people will go out, typically midsummer, treat a lot of vegetation in a pond, and 2 weeks later they go from having a weed problem to having an algae problem. So, there is likely nutrient cycling when those plants die. Now, a lot of plants will die in November, December, and then that's not really when algae wants to grow, so, maybe that's not an issue at that time. But there is likely cycling that goes on when these plants decompose and nutrients are released.
And just to follow up, maybe you answered it though, is would or could the use of herbicides cause vegetation die-off to pulse nutrients and or trigger harmful algal blooms?
Yeah, so in the example I gave, and I mentioned earlier timing in relation to another management practice, but timing can be very important for any management practice. So it is better to treat target vegetation early in the season, early in their growing season, so you're treating less vegetation. That is good for a lot of reasons, but one, it takes less herbicide to treat less vegetation, and you, in theory, get less nutrient release with an early timing.
All right, thank you. This one's for Chad, the DEC. What density of pondweed will be acceptable for clear cast treatment? Trace, sparse, or moderate?
So in most instances, if the target species is there, we allow treatment. So, I mean, certainly at trace levels, we would allow treatment because it goes to this idea that we should treat it early and not wait for it to fully develop until it gets to moderate or dense, where we can detect it at moderate or dense levels. So typically, if it's there in quantities that are being pulled up by the rake, then we allow treatment of the area.
Thank you. Another question for the DEC. Please discuss the benefits of the wetland regulation, specifically when applied to the waters of the lake.
So the wetland regulations are going to, involve us looking at just more areas of the lake, likely for herbicide treatment, for if we were looking at any other substantial activity in the lake area. So we're looking at more areas where there are and have always been wetland features, but we didn't have jurisdiction beyond the 12.4 acres. So we'll be looking at more, which will allow us to be more protective of wetlands. Wetlands are good for habitat, they're good for water quality, they're good for reducing erosion and sediment movement. And ideally, we'll have a good process so that can be fairly efficient, and that activities that need to proceed and minimize damage to those wetlands, can move forward. Would you add anything?
No, I mean, again, I think it's just making sure that we're not degrading what exists already, right? Around Buffalo, they were all tidal wetlands at one point. There was a massive amount of wetlands that no longer exist because of unchecked development. And we are spending millions and millions of dollars trying to reestablish very small vegetative beds, in and around Buffalo. So we just want to make sure that we're not overly impacting what exists on the lake, so we're not in that same situation that the lake is degraded.
Thank you. Given, again with the DEC, given the issues with Chautauqua Lake, would the state consider management of the lake similar to the Lake George Commission?
That is a much larger conversation and well above Chad and I's pay grade. But if it's a conversation that the community wants to have, I'm sure Bonnie and I can at least make sure it's on the radar for both our commissioner and for the governor's office.
Okay. Thank you. Did you have anything to add, Bonnie? Do you have anything to add? Or?
No, I'm interested in learning what Lake George has that Chautauqua Lake would want to be under it. What we depend on, and the position that I have as eyes and ears for the governor on the ground, is to not pretend to be the subject expert, but to try to identify those experts that can help dig in and further amplify those questions and those requests to see if there's some value in that. So I appreciate that.
Thank you. And just, again, to add, I'm sorry, I just would be remiss if I didn't look outside and see snowflakes falling. So moving forward, as we talk about our lake in the summer, stick around in Chautauqua County. The weather will change in 5 minutes. Now, I do really want to thank Bonnie and Frank. I could tell you this, anytime I need anything, it's a phone call away and immediate response. In fact, most times the governor's office calls me before I have to call them. So I appreciate Bonnie being here, and as well as Frank. They are the eyes and ears of the governor. And I will tell you, she does connect with the senator, the assemblyman, and myself. Contrary to beliefs and political philosophies, we are working together for this county and for these regions. So I do want to thank Bonnie and Frank for being here. For the Jefferson Project, you spoke about creating potential solutions from the research. What were the most significant actions taken on Lake George, and what impact have those actions had on that lake?
Yeah, that's a great question. Lake George specifically, one of the threats that was sort of established early on in the Jefferson Project was road salt. around the lake. And with the help of the LGA, using some of our data, they implemented a plan to reduce road salt, working with the towns and the actual truck drivers that apply the salt. And through their actions, the salt loading into Lake George has decreased dramatically. So that's a great example of sort of the research to the action.
Having said that, just something to keep in mind. Chautauqua Lake is surrounded by state roads. The state uses salt. We also have a bridge that goes over said lake. It's an interstate. And I've spoken with people, and if you ever watch, there's somewhat, unique, there's some sort of beauty to them, but every 100 feet you'll see a white line that goes down from the bridge. Those aren't design structures, those are actually drop inlets. And I talked to somebody and said, yeah, when one of those frees up, we take a 5-gallon bucket of salt, dump it in a drop inlet, and it'll thaw. Well, we're dumping 5 gallons of road salt into the lake directly. So, not a scientist, but I can tell you if Lake George noticed that the road salt does have an impact on the lake, although it has not been studied, and John Kelly's been very specific. They will not commit because that has not been studied in our lake. If you look at a lake that is surrounded by state roads and county roads and village roads where road salt is used, and it traverses the lake, and I think we might be unique and maybe one of the only lakes that is bisected by an interstate. Road salt, I'm sure, has some impact. How much, we're not sure, and that is probably an area for further study. But if you have to admit, we do not like any snow on that bridge for the right reasons, but there is no, and we've looked, I know the comment was mentioned before, John Jablonski had made it, and I've made it, and Julie and I had this discussion. In the design phase of the bridge, could we use some sort of containment system for that road salt, right? When it hits the bridge, and if it goes to those drop inlets, can it be captured in runoff and in a little channel or a trough, et cetera, and be brought into an area near the bridge to be then dissipated into the soil? That is still unclear, but again, we are looking at those things. It hasn't been scientifically proven, but my guess is if it's happening in Lake George, and we have a lot of road salt in and around Chautauqua Lake, it's probably, it would be an impact here as well. Having said that, yes.
Just to add that DOT and DEC have been working really closely together over the last 2-3 years to specifically look at opportunities to reduce road salt across the state. This is an issue that has been big up in Lake George, throughout the Adirondacks and other places. And so we had a whole reduced road salt campaign during this past year. Ironically, it hit in the year when we were already facing road salt shortages. And so I would also put my hats off to my colleague who's the DOT coordinator for this region, who actually has spent some time looking at alternative salt scenarios and ways that we could partner with local government to reduce salt use in the region. So again, we're particularly strong in terms of, I think, the DOT's interest in some of these things. So it's a conversation, we can work with Bonnie on following up on in terms of bringing those campaigns to the region.
Certainly. I could tell you here, one of the questions that was asked was the county in jeopardy with our road salt usage, and we were not, but we did pivot. Years ago, the county used to do a mix of salt and sand. They got away from that because obviously what is sand? A sediment. So if you are, again, near those areas where the runoff could go into the lake, you've increased that sediment. Likewise, there's a lot of drop inlets around areas in Chautauqua Lake. So we have, as a county, taken action to create that sand salt mix to help extend the use of our road salt, but also realizing limiting that mixture in those areas where we have drop inlets. At the same time, we do have vacuum trucks from the county, so we could start an early campaign of getting out if we notice that sediment is building up into our drop inlets, getting in, vacuuming that out and taking care of it. So just as Bonnie said, we're looking at things in the county to minimize our road salt usage as well. Jefferson Project. With more problems in the South Basin related to nutrient loading, why is the major focus on the North Basin or the north part of the lake?
I don't think that that's true, honestly. I think we're universally covering the lake top to bottom. We'll have sensing platforms in both basins, weather stations in both basins, and monitoring stations on the tributaries. that feed into both basins. So, and surveys will be conducted in both basins as well, so there's really no focus on one basin over the other at all.
Thank you. Marion, Dr. Divers for the Army Corps, why are the 3 objectives all related to habitats?
I think I'd have to go back and look at them and think about that carefully. The 3 objectives, that is part of the Army Corps' Aquatic Ecosystem Restoration mission. And so we really focused those objectives on quality, quantity, and connectivity availability, because those are the ways that we can, as part of the Aquatic Ecosystem Restoration mission, get approval for funding for later effort.
Thank you. One of the things, I think each of us here would really be able to comment on is if you've traveled to other lakes around New York State in particular, or around the country, and find out how many lakes are as developed as Chautauqua Lake. There is very little remaining lakeshore that is not developed, and if it is not developed, it's for significant reason. The steep grades on the hillside, et cetera. So those are things we have to keep in mind, although we like the development. And again, as a county representative, yes, if we have more development, it's more taxable property, more economic development to the region. But what is that impact as you go forward? Where are those developments taking place? But interestingly enough, Lake Placid has been a world-known lake for many, many years, and there are still areas of Lake Placid that are not accessible by road. The only way you get to a cottage or an area is by boat. So here, if you go around Chautauqua Lake, you will find very little lake shore that is not developed. So, over time, it's been a great thing, but there are impacts of all of our activities around the lake. For the DEC, this is a unique question. Do invasive species become classified as non-invasive over a certain amount of time?
Not that I'm aware of. That's the best I could do for you. Sorry. It's kind of not a great answer, but not that I'm aware of.
They may get identified as endemic at some point in time because they're just here for such a long period of time, but I think we are recognizing that still in that identification, they're non-native, they're very aggressive, and therefore have been invasive. So usually, we look at invasive species. If it's a new infestation, then we qualify them as either eradication or just management, right? So they'll go from, we'll jump from one category to the other, like for pondweed and milfoil, we're more in simply just a management phase because I don't think we're going to eradicate it. For starry stonewort, that's yet to be determined, and I leave it to people like Dr. Richardson to determine whether it's even possible to eradicate something like that.
I guess to expand on that, Dr. Richardson, have you seen any instance of this across the country? You've been all over. Have you seen anywhere where invasive weeds are now non-invasive or actually become native?
No, I've heard this mentioned before, but I can't think of a scenario where anything has been reclassified from invasive to endemic.
All right, thank you. One question back to the elected officials. Is there a possibility for a lake manager to bring all groups together for the greater good of Chautauqua Lake? This is something that is being discussed, and it's really it's at a discussion stage right now. Some believe that it is a valuable tool and a great step forward. Other people adamantly oppose it. But we, again, having a manager that would, again, third party, not to be connected with any stakeholder would be, in my opinion, a good step forward. Using the science that is proven, using the science that's collected, and making management strategies from there. Having said that, for Dr. Richardson, can you give us a brief overview of the North Carolina State University Management Plan for Chautauqua Lake?
Sure, and I'll keep it brief, but So it's a guidance document for aquatic plant management. It's not a recipe list, so it doesn't say do X, Y, and Z 5 times a year for the next 3 years and all your problems will be solved. What it does is it defines the problems that exist in the lake. It goes through the management techniques that are available, lists pros, cons for those management techniques, how they might be best implemented, how they might be used together or individually, and provide some guidance for putting together a cohesive strategy for moving year to year. So again, it doesn't say do this, don't do that. It says here's what's available, here's what you can do, here's a good strategy for putting the pieces together and moving forward. So, that would be the briefest description I could give.
All right, thank you. For Julie at the DEC, can you describe the procedure that was used to designate 450 acres of Chautauqua Lake as wetlands, since it seemed to occur when the lake was covered with ice?
So there was extensive mapping done through Cornell that was part of all of the new law. It's informational mapping. It is not regulatory mapping. I can't say that enough. It's a tool for us to use in the process, but it was not based upon, outside. We were not in that 1 year period going out and mapping in the field every single wetland. They were using aerial imagery and other resources to develop those maps. So the methodology for all of that work should be readily available, and if you need any assistance in tracking that down, please just reach out to us directly and we'll connect you.
And again, just to clarify, I think that applies more to upland wetlands rather than in-water wetlands in terms of the mapping that we have. But I think a number of times I've explained how we made the jurisdictional determination relative to the herbicide applications that were submitted.
And I think one of the questions, Chad, just to reiterate this before I think you addressed it, is due to the critical nature of the herbicide permits and timing of application, will they be expedited going forward?
So I'm hoping that this year is the most concerning year, since it's all relatively new, and that it becomes more standard procedure. But we have, like I said, we've been anticipating this and discussing it as early as October, November of last year. So hopefully we're in a good position. We have not issued I think from the Article 15 standpoint, we're pretty good. That's the herbicide application standpoint. We are just working through the remainder of the Article 24 wetland permits. I just read an email. We do have a couple questions on those wetland permits, so I will be getting those over to Glenn Sullivan and CLP and the municipalities next Monday, most likely. But we should be on track, like I said, to hopefully effectuate treatment at the end of April.
Thank you. For the Jefferson project, the last two, we can kind of combine them. Are the multi-sensor platforms positioned in the correct areas of Chautauqua Lake? And why not in the southern basin where a lot of the algal blooms occur?
So there will be one, and has been one for many years in the southern basin. If you guys could tell me the correct spot to put them, we would put them there. But really, they're located specifically to target certain research questions, and we have moved them around over the past few years. This year, we're focused on interbasin exchange in the north, along with some interesting phytoplankton dynamics in some of the deeper holes. And in the South Basin, also that interbasin exchange, but then the ephemeral stratification. So being a little bit further north in the South Basin gives us that proximity to Bemis Bay and a little bit deeper water to look at that ephemeral stratification. So in the north, same sort of thing. We're in a deep hole, but really close to Bemis Bay as well. And then keep in mind, we have these observational platforms, but then all of that is help validate a model, a 3D model that covers the entire lake, right? So the platforms are in one spot, but really our goal is to understand everything. And keep in mind, in future years, they might change positions in the lake. So we're not really set in stone on it. It just depends on what our research goal is at the time.
Last question for the Jefferson Project. Would you agree that the evidence of an ephemeral stratification in nutrient release in the South Basin could be reduced by introducing nutrient inactivation compounds?
So these are things like alum and other treatments for phosphorus. That's a way to sort of trap it down in the sediments. They have been shown to work in some places. They also cause negative effects sometimes in other places as well. The feasibility of that use in the South Basin would need to be extensively studied, and to make that determination, which is probably something that the Army Corps is going to look into as one of their strategies. I couldn't see her table, I apologize, Marion, if that's one of your potential options for the South Basin. But that certainly is a strategy that people have used for mitigation of phosphorus.
Thank you. For Dr. Richardson, can you prove that migrating aquatic birds will not be harmed if they eat aquatic plants exposed to herbicides? Swans, geese, mallards, etc.
Well, I'll try to address that. So first, for any herbicide to be registered by EPA, the company that wants to register it has to prove that it doesn't bioaccumulate in organisms. So that means that through either passive or active intake, those organisms that are exposed to it don't increase the concentration inside themselves. The other thing that those companies have to do is provide toxicity data for representative species. So, they obviously can't financially run through every potential species that might come into contact with the herbicide, but they run through representative species. So Clearcast is the herbicide that's been most commonly mentioned today. It inhibits a specific enzyme found in plants. That enzyme is not in humans, it's not in birds, specific to plants. So when you look at the toxicity data between plants and non-plants, typically with that mode of action, you see about 1,000-fold difference in effect. So that would mean that if you're putting out X rate for curlew pondweed control, it would take 1,000x of that rate to have an impact on birds. In general, I don't remember the specific toxicity numbers, but in general, that's around the risk threshold present with that mode of action.
And again, not an expert, but we've been using herbicides, as we've said, since the 1950s. And if herbicides are used, and much more injected into the water as compared to being sprayed, as if we have we'd see an old airboat, or, in fact, you drive down the Conowongo Creek, they use helicopters to come in and drop spray for different types of insect infestation. But we have not seen a massive amount or dead birds lying along the shorelines or floating in the lake due to that. So it is a good question, but I think we've proven the safety of our animals. Yeah.
Avian influenza is a real thing, and you very well may find a lot of birds that are dead due to avian influenza, and it exists here in Region 9. It is prolific here in Region 9. So if you do notice dead birds, since we're having this, we can't presume it's from herbicides, it's most likely from avian influenza. And if you do come upon dead birds or a lot of dead birds, please contact us. Try not to handle them, because it can be, although the risk is very low, it can be transferred to humans, is my understanding. So the recommendation is to, use gloves, wear a mask, wear goggles, and just dispose of it in a, in a tied garbage bag, or leave it where it is if you're concerned about any kind of exposure. But that was just an aside.
Done avian influenza out at the table. Honestly, this is going to be probably the most difficult thing that we're seeing in this field season, just because it's so prolific and it's reaching so many places. So please take a look at the fact sheet. It's really handy to have you all informed as we get through this together.
Thank you. Uniquely enough, if anybody would have been here last week, I would say, and I didn't realize this, I think I've seen it before, this time of year you will find last weekend, hundreds of swans out here in the open water as they migrate back. So it's pretty beautiful. We have a lot of unique things. We have a great number of bald eagles now repopulating the area, but it's neat to go out there and see. People can complain about the lake and it's whatever, but to see swans floating, it's pretty majestic and rather beautiful. Last question one more for others. But for Dr. Richardson, based on your experience overall, do you anticipate that Eurasian milfoil can largely be reduced long-term and maintained at a reduced level?
Well, I'm not sure anticipate's the right word, but what I would say is that you can reduce Eurasian milfoil in the long term with the right strategies. And the same for starry stonewort. You can reduce it with the right strategies, but on the flip side, wrong strategies or even correct techniques used incorrectly, you could have increases in those over time. So personally, I wouldn't anticipate, a certain amount of acreage in the future, but it is possible to reduce the acreage to much lower levels with a good management program. And once you get to lower levels, it's a lot cheaper to maintain plants or weeds at those low levels than it is to try to manage them when they're at high levels.
Thank you. Last question really for Dr. Divers. One for you and one for the electeds. For the Army Corps, when will a draft report be issued?
So I showed a timeline in the presentation I gave. It's dependent on how we progress moving forward, but we anticipate within about a year and a half.
Okay, thank you.
And we will keep you all posted as that progresses. Thanks.
And the last one came for electeds. When will actionable solutions be proposed? Almost anecdotally or throughout the years, there are different solutions proposed, but we need to make sure as we go forward, what is the right combination? I think Dr. Richardson just alluded to it. The right combination of treatment or the right combination of our actions could be successful. The wrong application could be detrimental. So we want to make sure we're doing things correctly. Again, I can speak on behalf of myself from the county and or a board member of the Alliance, we're not the experts. We need to rely on those experts that have the knowledge, have the data, and the technology and the science to support those actions. Chautauqua Lake is no silver bullet answer. It's not out there. Completely impossible. If you look at it, we've been using herbicides for over 75 years and we still have issues. We've been mechanically harvesting for decades. We still have concerns. It's a combination of the two that are going to provide success and focus and cleaning that lake up. I stand by the senator. We've all said this, even sat in my seat as the executive and as a legislator. The Chautauqua Lake is not going to be a swimming pool. We have to be able to understand that this is a body of water that is controlled by Mother Nature, and she's pretty tough, and she's going to do what she wants. Uniquely enough, if you go into the Post-Journal, I think it was the Evening Observer in the 1890s, a statement that was made by one of the local representatives, if we do nothing, in 25 years, Chautauqua Lake will be a glorified swamp. The same situation is occurring over 100 years later. There was a study done in 1923 where they went out and measured a spot just off of, I believe it's Rock Island out here in the South Basin. And they said the lake was starting to, fill in, and they went out to the same spot they've estimated without, the clarity of GPS that we have now. It's the same depth of 3.5 feet that it was 100 years ago. So we understand these things. I'm not making light of it, but these are concerns that have been here before, and we will continue to focus on. I apologize. I do need to recognize we do have one individual who is representing the town of Mina. I'm sorry, Amy, who is here as a representative. So one of our electeds is here. Although Finley Lake is unique. It's his own body of water, but there is a lot of similarities. And again, Finley Lake is working to take some of the information that's happening and the science that's going here at Chautauqua Lake and implementing that back in Finley Lake. So thank you for being here, and her husband Mark. And the waterways in Chautauqua County aren't solely this body of water here. There's 5 lakes in this county. Casadega Lake, we've been doing some extensive work up there, looking to do more. Obviously, Lake Erie is an international body of water. But uniquely enough, if you go to the town of Chautauqua and you stand up by the water tower and you dump a glass of water, bear with me, theoretically, to your left, it goes down and rolls down to the watershed into Lake Erie through the St. Lawrence Seaway into the Atlantic Ocean, somewhere around New York City, etc. If you look to the right, and dump that same glass of water. It goes down into Chautauqua Lake, through the other tributaries, lakes, rivers, and on down to the Gulf of America. So unique that you can stand and throw water 6 feet in one direction either way and end up thousands of miles away due to the uniqueness. I'd be interested to think if there's any other place in the country that has that unique designation. There's so many things about Chautauqua County that I've learned is very unique. But the one thing I will tell you, we stand by this strength in unity. No single group can handle this by itself. If that were the case, respectfully, the state could have done it. If the state by themselves, hey, we can do it. But they realize, along with all of us, that we all need to work together. Our stakeholders, we need to work together. The county, our alliances, our stakeholders throughout the area, throughout the region, work with the Jefferson Project, Dr. Richardson at NC State, the Army Corps of Engineers. We realize this is a group effort. And we are committed to making sure we move forward. This lake is our legacy. Some people have said this, what will our legacy be? I sure don't want it to be the mistakes we made in Chautauqua Lake. I'd rather say we started the ball rolling, and it's a big ball. It's more like trying to move a mountain. But this isn't stopping me, this isn't stopping any one of us here. You are all here to be part of that movement, all here to move that mountain. So I'd like to thank every one of you for attending today. You are the stalwarts, you are the ones who hung on the longest. I appreciate that. For those of you in attendance, I'm going to throw something out jokingly with a personal friend. Penn State, I think, is on its way to winning its 4th national title in a row. Andy Sharp and I go way back as wrestlers, so I appreciate him. You know, what we're finding here, I had a longtime classmate, the family homes are generational, and people are investing in this community. People aren't selling the homes. Brothers and sisters are forming LLCs and coming back to maintain the family home that they've had or purchase property in and around Chautauqua Lake. So our legacy continues, and I want to make sure that we all are doing the best we can to preserve that. Thank you so very much, and have a great afternoon.